I'm Kristin Wilson, 32, a pediatric nurse who thought I'd finally found my forever family. After 3 years with Marcus, I was planning our wedding when his text arrived at 2:47 a.m. My parents don't want you at Christmas. They think it's better if you stay home. The words hit like ice water. For months, I'd sensed the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms, the polite smiles that never reached their eyes. But this felt different, calculated, cruel. What I didn't know was that his family had been orchestrating something far more devastating than holiday exclusion. The truth about their real intentions would surface in ways none of us expected. And when it did, everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the family I was marrying into would shatter completely. The woman they dismissed as not good enough was about to show them exactly who they were dealing with. I stared at my phone for 20 minutes before the words finally sank in. The blue glow illuminated my face in the darkness of our shared apartment, casting shadows that seemed to mirror the hollow feelings spreading through my chest. Marcus was asleep beside me, his breathing steady and peaceful, completely unaware that he'd just torn apart 3 years of my life with a single message. My wedding planning notebook lay open on the nightstand, filled with careful lists and color-coded tabs. I'd been so meticulous, so hopeful. Every page represented hours of dreaming about our future together, about finally having the family I lost when my parents died in that car accident 7 years ago. I was 19 then, suddenly alone in the world except for a distant aunt, who sent birthday cards but never called. That's why Marcus's family had meant everything to me. They were my chance at belonging somewhere, at having Sunday dinners and holiday traditions and people who would remember my birthday without being reminded. I'd throw myself into winning their approval with the same dedication I brought to my patients at the children's hospital. 12-hour shifts didn't matter if it meant I could bring homemade cookies to their family gatherings or remember every detail they shared about their lives. But looking back now, I could see the signs I'd been too desperate to acknowledge. The way Margaret, Marcus's mother, would smile at me with her lips, but never her eyes. How she'd ask about my work with that slight tilt of her head that somehow made "How wonderful that you help sick children" sound like a polite dismissal rather than genuine interest. The family photos that lined their mantelpiece told their own story: Marcus and his parents at graduations, vacations, celebrations, but none from the past 2 years that included me. Even though I'd been present for most of them, I remembered. The engagement party planning, how Margaret had gently but firmly redirected every suggestion I made. "Oh, Kristin, that's lovely, but we've always done things this way." The venue I'd researched was replaced with our country club. The flowers I'd chosen were swapped for Margaret's preferred arrangements. Even the guest list became a negotiation, where my nursing school friends were deemed space constraints, while distant cousins I'd never met made the cut. Marcus had been caught in the middle, or so I told myself. "Mom just wants everything perfect," he'd say, running his hands through his hair in that familiar gesture of frustration. "You know how she gets about family events." I nod and adjust, always adjust, because I understood how important family was. I had lost mine. I wasn't going to let my stubborn pride cost me his. The cruel irony was that my own success had probably worked against me. When I'd been promoted to charge nurse, Margaret's congratulations felt forced. When I'd been featured in the hospital newsletter for my work with pediatric cancer patients, she barely glanced at the article. I realized now that every achievement, every sign of my independence and capability, had been another mark against me in some invisible ledger she kept. And Marcus had seen it all happening. That was perhaps the most painful realization of all. He'd watched his mother systematically exclude me, had participated in family conversations where my absence was planned rather than accidental, and he'd said nothing. Worse than nothing, he'd helped orchestrate it. The wedding planning notebook suddenly felt heavy in my hands, its tearful tabs and carefully written notes now looking like evidence of my own naivety. 3 years of believing I was building something real, something lasting, when I was actually just an inconvenience they were trying to manage until they could figure out how to remove me entirely. I closed the notebook and set it aside. my hands trembling slightly. Tomorrow I would have to face Marcus, have to ask the questions I should have asked months ago. But tonight, in the darkness of what I thought was our home, I finally allowed myself to see the truth I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. I had never been welcome in this family, and Marcus had known it all along. The next morning arrived with the false brightness that December brings, sunlight streaming through our bedroom windows and highlighting the dust motes that danced in the air like tiny lies made visible. Marcus stirred beside me, reaching across the bed with the automatic gesture of someone who expected to find comfort there. His hand found my shoulder, and for a moment, I almost let myself sink back into the familiar warmth of his embrace. Then I remembered the text. "Good morning, beautiful," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "Did you sleep okay?" I sat up, putting distance between us that felt both necessary and heartbreaking. "We need to talk about your message last night." His entire body went rigid. I watched the transformation happen in real time. The sleepy contentment draining from his features, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "Kris, I can explain. Can you?" I turned to face him fully, studying the man I planned to marry in 6 months. At 34, Marcus still carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who'd never truly been denied anything he wanted. His dark hair was rumpled from sleep, his green eyes the same ones I'd fallen in love with now darting away from mine, because I've been thinking about it all night, and I'm not sure there's an explanation that makes sense. He sat up, running those familiar hands through his hair. "Mom called yesterday after you left for your shift. She was upset about something. I don't even remember what, and she started talking about Christmas dinner and how stressful it's been planning everything. So you decided I was the source of stress?" "No. God, no, that's not." He stopped, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he couldn't quite swallow. "Look, you know how Mom gets during the holidays. Everything has to be perfect, and with the whole family coming this year, your whole family, not mine." The words came out sharper than I intended, cutting through his explanation like a scalpel through an affected tissue. "I don't have family coming, Marcus, you know that. You've always known that." His face crumpled slightly, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the man I'd fallen in love with, the one who'd held me through panic attacks during my first year of nursing school, who'd driven 4 hours to be with me when I'd lost my last living relative. But the moment passed, replaced by something weaker. That's not what I meant, and you know it. I got up and walked to our dresser, needing space to think. Among the framed photos scattered across its surface was one from Marcus's college graduation 3 years ago, back when his parents still included me in family pictures. I picked it up, studying Margaret's face in the image. Even then, even in that early photo, I could see the tightness around her eyes when she looked at me. "Tell me about Jessica," I said, not turning around. The silence stretched so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "How do you know about Jessica? Answer the question." Another pause. We dated in college for about 2 years, and it didn't work out?" His tone was carefully neutral, the kind of voice someone uses when they're trying not to lie, but also not tell the whole truth. I turned back to face him. "Did your parents like her?" The question hung in the air between us like smoke. Marcus's face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, guilt, resignation. That's different." "How?" "Because," he stopped, started again. "Because with Jessica, there were real issues. Real incompatibilities, such as she didn't understand family commitments. She was always trying to pull me away from family events, making me choose between her and them." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. And how did that end? "She gave me an ultimatum. Sad I had to choose." His voice carried a note of old resentment, as if he still believed he'd been the wronged party. "So I chose my family." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, pieces of a puzzle I hadn't realized I'd been solving suddenly clicking into place. "How many times has this happened, Marcus?" "What do you mean?" "How many women have you brought home who weren't right?" For your family? The color drained from his face. Kristin, that's not how many. 2, he whispered, including Jessica, and me makes 3. He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. The truth was written across his features like text on a page. For 34 years, Marcus had been the perfect son, the golden child who could do no wrong as long as he never truly challenged his parents' vision of what his life should look like. Every woman who threatened that vision, who couldn't be molded or managed or dismissed, became a problem to be solved. What did they tell you about me? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Nothing. They never said anything directly, but he looked down at his hands. Mom worried that you were too independent, that you wouldn't understand how close our family is. Independent. I repeated the word like it was a foreign concept. You mean because I have a career I love? Because I can pay my own bills? Because I don't need your family's approval to feel good about myself? That's not what she meant. Then what did she mean, Marcus? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like your mother has been planning to get rid of me from the beginning, and you've been helping her do it. The accusation hung between us, heavy and undeniable. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. In that moment of silence, I saw our entire relationship with startling clarity, not as the love story I believed it to be, but as a slow-motion tragedy where I was the only one who didn't know how it was going to end. I love you, he said finally, the words sounding desperate and hollow. You have to believe that. Do you? I asked. Because love isn't just a feeling, Marcus. It's a choice. It's choosing to defend the person you love, even when it's uncomfortable. It's choosing them over and over again, especially when other people try to make you choose something else. His face crumpled completely then, and I knew I had my answer. Marcus loved me the way someone loves a beautiful sunset passively, appreciatively, but without any real commitment to protecting or preserving it. When the light faded, he'd simply turn his attention to something else. I stood up, suddenly exhausted. I'm going to take a shower. When I come out, I want you to decide something. Either you're going to call your mother and tell her that I'm your fiancé, that I will be at Christmas dinner, and that her behavior toward me stops now, or you're going to move out of this apartment and back home where you belong. I didn't wait for his answer. Some conversations are too important to have in bedrooms filled with the detritus of broken dreams. But as I closed the bathroom door behind me, I could hear him reaching for his phone, and I knew which choice he was going to make. The shower water ran cold before I found the courage to turn it off. I'd stood under the stream until my skin was red and wrinkled, hoping the heat might wash away the conversation I'd just had. But some stains go deeper than soap can reach. When I finally emerged, wrapped in a towel and dreading what waited for me, I could hear Marcus's voice through the bathroom door. He was on the phone, his tone low and urgent. I pressed my ear to the door, knowing I was crossing a line, but no longer caring about the boundaries that had kept me ignorant for so long. Can't just uninvite her, Mom. She's my fiancé. Margaret's voice came through the speaker, sharp and clear. Marcus always kept his phone volume too high. Marcus, darling, we've discussed this. Family has concerns. What concerns? She's a nurse. She saves children's lives. What could possibly be concerning about that? It's not her job, sweetheart. It's her attitude. She's so intense about everything. Always trying to prove herself. Always pushing herself into conversations where she doesn't quite belong. I felt my cheeks burn, pushing myself into conversations. I thought about every family dinner where I'd sat quietly unless directly addressed. Every gathering where I'd helped in the kitchen rather than join the living room discussions about people and places I didn't know. She's trying to fit in, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is she? Or is she trying to change us to fit her? Margaret's voice carried that particular tone of patient disappointment that I'd heard. Her use on Marcus since I'd known them? Darling, I want you to be happy. But happiness isn't just about feelings. It's about compatibility, about building a life with someone who understands your world. She understands. Does she? When we talked about the wedding venue, she had all these ideas about some community center where she volunteers. A community Center Marcus, for our family celebration. My hands clenched into fists. The community center was where I taught first aid classes to underserved families. I thought having our reception there would be meaningful, a way to give back while celebrating our beginning. Margaret had smiled and nodded when I mentioned it. Then somehow the conversation had moved to their country club and never returned. She was trying to be thoughtful, Marcus said weakly. She was trying to impose her values on our family. There is a difference. Margaret's voice grew gentler, more persuasive. Sweetheart, I know you care about her, but caring about someone doesn't mean you should marry them. Look what happened with Jessica. Jessica was different, was she? Independent career woman, very strong opinions about how things should be done, always making you choose between her priorities and your family's. Sound familiar? The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear Marcus's resolve crumbling through the phone. I just don't think Christmas dinner is the place for this kind of tension, Margaret continued. Let's get through the holidays peacefully, and then in January, when emotions aren't running so high, we can all sit down and have a real conversation about what's best for everyone. She'd be devastated. She understand. If she truly cares about you, she wants what's best for your family relationships. And if she doesn't understand well, that tells you something important, doesn't it? I backed away from the door, my heart pounding so hard I was sure Marcus could hear it. The casual cruelty of the conversation, the way Margaret spoke about me like I was a problem to be managed rather than a person. Marcus left. It was breathtaking in its calculated coldness, but what struck me most was Marcus's tone. Not angry, not defensive resigned. Like he'd had this conversation before and knew how it would end. What should I tell her? He asked. Tell her the truth. That Christmas is a family time. And with all the relatives coming, it's just too much stress to worry about everyone getting along. Tell her you'll make it up to her. And if she doesn't accept that? The pause was long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Margaret's voice came through, colder than before. Then you'll know where her priorities really lie, won't you? I heard Marcus's phone click off, followed by the sound of him sitting heavily on our bed. Our bed. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, hiding in my own bathroom, listening to my fiancé plan my exclusion from his family like I was some kind of social disease. When I finally opened the bathroom door, Marcus was sitting exactly where I'd pictured him, his head in his hands. He looked up when he heard me, and I saw something in his eyes that might have been shame if he'd been capable of it. Well, I said, I talked to her, and he took a breath like he was preparing. For surgery, she thinks it might be better if we keep Christmas small this year. Just immediate family. I heard. His head snapped up. You were listening? I was protecting myself. Apparently, that's something I should have started doing a long time ago. I sat down in the chair across from him, still wrapped in my towel, feeling more exposed than if I'd been naked. So this is your choice? You're choosing your mother's comfort over your fiancé's dignity? It's not about choosing. It's exactly about choosing. I stood up, suddenly filled with a clarity that felt like cold water in my veins. Every relationship is about choosing Marcus. Every single day you choose who matters most to you, and today you chose her. Kristin, please, no. The word came out sharper than I intended, cutting through his plea like it was made of paper. No more explanations, no more excuses. No more pretending this is about anything other than what it is. I walked to our closet and started pulling out clothes, my movements sharp and decisive. I'm going to get dressed and then I'm going to work. When I come home tonight, I want you gone. Gone. Back to your mother's house where you belong. Because that's what this is really about, isn't it? You're 34 years old and you still can't stand up to your mommy. The words hit him like a slap. His face went white, then red, then white again. That's not fair. Fair? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been including me in family decisions from the beginning. Fair would have been defending me when your mother made her little comments. Fair would have been choosing the woman you claim to love over the woman who still controls your bank account. His silence was answer enough. I finished getting dressed in the thick quiet that had settled between us, each piece of clothing feeling like armor I should have put on years ago. "I really do love you," he said as I was leaving for work. I turned back to look at him one last time, this man I planned to marry, to build a life with, to grow old beside. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by his own cowardice. "I know you do," I said, "but you love her more. You always have." The door closed behind me with a soft click that sounded like the end of everything I thought I wanted. Work that day was a blessing and a curse. Blessing because 12-hour shifts in pediatric intensive care don't leave much room for personal drama. When a 6-year-old is fighting for his life, your broken engagement suddenly seems very small. Curse because the moments between crises gave my mind space to wander, and it kept wandering back to Marcus's voice on the phone. Resigned and complicit, I was checking on Emma, a 7-year-old recovering from heart surgery, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Kristin, this is Linda Chum, Marcus's aunt. Could we talk?" "It's important." Linda. I remembered her from a few family gatherings. Margaret's sister-in-law, a successful attorney who'd married Marcus's uncle David about 10 years ago. She was always impeccably dressed, quietly observant, and one of the few family members who'd ever asked me direct questions about my work. But we'd never exchanged numbers, never spoken privately. I texted back during my lunch break. "How did you get my number?" "David gave it to me. He got it from Marcus's phone last Christmas when you were organizing that group photo. I've been keeping it for when I might need it. Today seems like that day." Something about her directness appealed to me. After a morning of Marcus's deflections and evasions, Linda's straightforward approach felt like fresh air. "What's this about, Margaret?" And her pattern of destroying Marcus's relationships. "Can you meet after your shift?" My heart stopped. Pattern. The word implied repetition, intention, system. "You know about the others?" "I know about all of them. Every single one." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown, somewhere neutral where we could talk without interruption. I spent the rest of my shift in a strange state of anticipation and dread. Part of me wanted to know what Linda knew, but another part was terrified of learning that my situation was even worse than I'd imagined. Linda was already waiting when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with 2 cups of coffee and a manila folder beside her. She stood when she saw me, and I was struck by how different she looked outside of family gatherings. Without Margaret's overwhelming presence dominating the room, Linda seemed more substantial somehow, more present. "Thank you for coming," she said as we sat down. "I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I should." I wrapped my hands around the warm coffee cup, grateful for something to anchor me. "But after this morning, he chose Christmas dinner over you." It wasn't a question. Linda's dark eyes were sympathetic, but unsurprised, and I realized she'd been expecting this moment for a long time. "How did you know?" "Because I've seen this movie before. 3 times, actually." She pushed the manila folder across the table. "Jessica Martinez dated Marcus from 2019 to 2021. Elena Rodriguez, 6 months in 2022, and now you." I stared at the folder but didn't open it. "What's in there?" "Everything I've been documenting for the past 5 years. Margaret's methods, her manipulations, her systematic destruction of every relationship Marcus has tried to build with someone she can't control." "Why?" The question came out as barely a whisper. Why would she do that? Linda leaned back in her chair, her expression growing hard. "Because Margaret Chun Hartwell, yes, that's her full name. Though she dropped the Chun part when it became professionally convenient, is a woman who has built her entire identity around control. And Marcus is her masterpiece." She opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. It showed a younger Margaret with a man I didn't recognize, both of them dressed formally and standing in front of what looked like a corporate logo. Margaret wasn't born into money, Linda continued. She clawed her way up from a working-class family through a combination of intelligence, ruthlessness, and strategic marriages. First to Marcus's biological father, who died when Marcus was 3. then to Robert, who brought old money and social connections. I studied the photograph, trying to reconcile this version of Margaret with the polished society woman I knew. I don't understand what this has to do with me. Everything. Linda pulled out another document, what looked like a trust fund agreement. Margaret has spent 30 years building the perfect life, the perfect family image, the perfect son. Marcus isn't just her child, he's her legacy, her proof that she belongs in the world she married into. But surely she wants him to be happy. She wants him to be appropriate. There's a difference. Linda's voice carried a note of bitter experience. When David and I got married, I was a junior associate at a small firm, working 80-hour weeks and living in a studio apartment. Margaret made it very clear that I wasn't what she'd envisioned for David. But you're still married. Because David chose me over his family's approval. And because I had something you and Jessica and Elena didn't have, which was a law degree and absolutely no patience for psychological manipulation. Linda smiled grimly. It also helped that David's inheritance was already secured and couldn't be touched by family disapproval. Marcus's situation is more complicated. She pulled out a thick document marked Hartwell Family Trust across the top. This is why Margaret has so much power over Marcus. His inheritance, which is substantial, comes with conditions. He has to maintain appropriate family relationships and make suitable life choices. The trust board has to approve any major decisions, including marriage. My blood went cold. The trust board? Margaret, Robert, and David. 2 votes can override 1. And David? David abstains from family politics as much as possible, which means Margaret has effective veto power over Marcus's life choices. I thought about Marcus's apartment, the one I thought was ours, and realized I'd never seen him pay rent. I thought about his job at his father's investment firm, how he'd never seemed particularly worried about performance reviews or office politics. I thought about the casual way he spent money, never checking account balances or worrying about bills. He's completely financially dependent on them. Completely, and Margaret has made sure it stays that way. Linda leaned forward, her voice dropping. Every woman Marcus has brought home has been subjected to the same treatment. First, the subtle exclusions, family events where they're forgotten, conversations where they're ignored, traditions where they don't quite fit. Then the escalation concerns about compatibility, suggestions that the relationship is causing family stress. And if that doesn't work, then comes the ultimatum. Choose your family or choose her. And Marcus always chooses family, because choosing otherwise means losing everything he's ever known, everything that makes him feel secure and important. I felt sick. So I was never really in competition with other women. I was in competition with Margaret. You were in competition with a system designed to eliminate you. Linda's expression softened. And I'm sorry for that. I should have warned you earlier, but I kept hoping that Marcus would be different this time. That you would be different. That you'd be strong enough to fight back. She paused. I think I was right about that part. I looked at the folder full of evidence, at the patterns Linda had documented, at the systematic destruction of relationship after relationship. What happened to the others? Jessica moved to Portland. Elena went back to school in Chicago. Both of them were brilliant, accomplished women who let Margaret convince them they weren't good enough for Marcus. And now it's my turn to disappear. Or, Linda said, sliding a business card across the table, you can decide to fight back. I picked up the card. It was expensive cardstock, embossed with Linda's name and the logo of Chun and Associates, Family Law. I don't understand. Margaret has been getting away with this for years because no one has ever challenged her methods. She relies on shame, secrecy, and the assumption that her victims will simply disappear rather than cause a scene. Linda's smile was sharp as a blade. But what if someone decided not to disappear? What if someone decided to shine a light on her patterns, her manipulations, her systematic abuse of power? You're talking about what? Suing them? I'm talking about consequences, real ones. The kind that might make Margaret think twice before destroying another woman's life. Linda leaned back in her chair, but it would require courage. and it would require being willing to burn some bridges. I thought about Marcus, probably packing his things from our apartment right now. I thought about the wedding dress hanging in my closet, the deposits we'd lose, the explanations I'd have to give to friends and coworkers. I thought about Jessica and Elena, driven away by shame and exhaustion, and all the women who might come after me if nothing changed. What would I have to do? Linda's smile grew wider. Trust me. And be ready to show Margaret exactly what happens when she underestimates someone. For the first time in 24 hours, I felt something that wasn't despair. It was small and fragile, but it was there a spark of something that might eventually become hope. Tell me everything, I said. Linda's law office was nothing like the sterile corporate environments I'd imagined. Located in a converted brownstone downtown, it felt more like a very organized home than a place of business. Family photos lined the walls alongside legal diplomas, and the coffee was actually good. When I arrived Saturday morning, Linda was waiting with a stack of files and a determined expression. "Before we start," she said, gesturing for me to sit in one of the comfortable chairs across from her desk. "I need you to understand what we're really talking about here. This isn't just about your relationship with Marcus." "What do you mean?" "Margaret's behavior follows a pattern that goes beyond simple disapproval. What she's been doing, the systematic isolation, the financial manipulation, the psychological pressure, constitutes a form of abuse. Not just of you, but of Marcus too." I felt a chill. Abuse is a strong word. "It's the right word." Linda pulled out a thick file marked Behavioral Patterns, Confidential. "I've been documenting Margaret's methods for 5 years, ever since what happened with Jessica. Look at this." She spread out a series of documents across her desk phone records, email printouts, financial statements, even photographs. It looked like the kind of evidence board you'd see in a crime drama. "This is Jessica's story," Linda began, pointing to a timeline she'd created. College graduate, working as a social worker. Marcus brought her to family dinner in September 2019. By October, Margaret was asking concerned questions about Jessica's student loan debt. By November, she was suggesting that Jessica seemed overwhelmed by family expectations. Linda moved to another section of documents. December, Jessica wasn't invited to the Christmas Eve party because it was too intimate for someone so new to the family. January, Margaret started making subtle comments about how Jessica's work schedule conflicted with family commitments. March, the engagement ultimatum. What ultimatum? Margaret told Marcus that if he was serious about Jessica, they needed to have a frank conversation about expectations. Financial expectations, social expectations, family loyalty expectations. When Jessica couldn't meet those expectations, she was out. She was out. But not before Margaret had systematically destroyed her confidence and made her feel like every aspect of her life was inadequate. Linda pulled out a photograph of a young woman with kind eyes and a tired smile. "Jessica called me about 6 months after the breakup. She was in therapy trying to understand why she felt like such a failure. I stared at Jessica's photo, seeing myself reflected in her expression. Did you tell her what you've told me?" I tried. But by then the damage was done. Margaret had convinced her that she really wasn't right for Marcus, that she really didn't understand their family, that leaving was the best thing for everyone. Linda moved to another section of her evidence. Elena was different. She was tougher, more confident. Margaret had to adjust her tactics. How? Financial pressure. Elena was an artist, a successful one, but artists don't typically have trust funds. Margaret started making comments about financial security, about the importance of practical considerations in marriage. She suggested Elena might be interested in Marcus more for his money than his personality. That's horrible. It was effective. Elena started questioning her own motives, started wondering if Margaret might be right. By the time Marcus gave her the same ultimatum, she was so confused about her own feelings that she walked away without a fight. I felt sick thinking about these women, both accomplished and confident, being systematically broken down by Margaret's manipulations. And now it's my turn. Now it's your turn. But here's what Margaret didn't count on: you have something Jessica and Elena didn't have: which is me and documentation, and a very specific understanding of how the law views financial coercion and psychological abuse. Linda opened another file, this one filled with legal documents. I've been researching Margaret's methods from a legal perspective. What she's doing with the trust fund using financial dependency to control adults, children's personal relationships, that's legally problematic. How so? Trusts are supposed to benefit the beneficiaries, not control them. When trust conditions are used to manipulate personal relationships, especially when those conditions are discriminatory. Discriminatory? Think about it. What do Jessica, Elena, and you have in common? I considered this. We all work in helping professions. Social work, art therapy, nursing. Lower income potential than investment banking or corporate law. What else? I stopped understanding dawning. We're all minorities. Jessica's Latina, Elena's Black, I'm half Korean. Exactly. Margaret's version of suitable has some very specific characteristics. White, wealthy, socially connected, and preferably dependent on family approval for self-worth. The implications hit me like a freight train. She's not just controlling, she's discriminating. And using the family trust as a weapon to enforce that discrimination, Linda leaned forward. That's legally actionable, especially when there's a pattern of behavior. But how do we prove it? We already have proof. Jessica and Elena both documented their experiences, emails, text messages, witnesses to conversations. I've been collecting their stories for years, waiting for the right moment. And you think this is the right moment? I think you're the right person. Jessica was too hurt. Elena was too angry. But you're strategic. You understand systems. You know how to build cases, and you're not emotionally destroyed yet. Linda was right. 3 years of nursing had taught me to compartmentalize, to analyze situations clinically, even when they were personal. I could see Margaret's behavior as a pattern rather than a personal failing on my part. What would we need to do? First, we document everything. Every conversation, every exclusion, every manipulation. We build a timeline that shows the pattern clearly. And then we give Margaret a choice. She can stop interfering in Marcus's relationships and reform the trust conditions, or we can make her pattern of behavior very public. Public how? Linda smiled grimly. Margaret has built her entire identity around social status and family. Reputation. She's on the board of 3 charities, chairs the hospital fundraising committee, and has her name on a building at the country club. How do you think those organizations would feel about learning that one of their prominent members has been using financial coercion to enforce racial discrimination in her family? The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. You're talking about destroying her reputation. I'm talking about consequences, natural consequences for unacceptable behavior. Linda gathered the files into a neat stack. But I want to be very clear about something. This isn't about getting Marcus back. What do you mean? Even if we succeed, even if we force Margaret to back down and reform her behavior, that doesn't mean Marcus will suddenly become the man you deserve. He's 34 years old and he's chosen financial security over personal integrity repeatedly. That's not something that changes overnight. I nodded, feeling a surprising sense of relief. I know, this isn't about him anymore. What is it about? I thought about Jessica's tired smile, Elena's confusion, all the women Margaret had probably destroyed before I ever met Marcus. I thought about the women who might come after me if nothing changed. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Linda's smile was fierce and proud. Then let's get to work. She pulled out a legal pad and uncapped a pen. Tell me everything. Every comment, every exclusion, every time you felt like you were being tested or judged. We're going to build a case that even Margaret can't manipulate her way out of. For the first time since receiving Marcus's text, I felt like I was moving forward instead of just surviving. Margaret had chosen the wrong woman to underestimate. The Hartwell family trust documents made for fascinating reading. In the way that car accidents are fascinating, you're looking at something terrible, but you can't look away. Linda had spread them across her conference table Monday. Evening after I'd finished my shift, and even with my limited legal knowledge, I could see how carefully constructed Margaret's web of control really was. This is the original trust document from 1995, Linda explained, pointing to a thick sheaf of papers. Robert's father established it when Marcus was 8, after Robert remarried Margaret. The language is pretty standard education expenses, living allowances, eventual distribution of principal upon marriage, or age 35. 35, Marcus is 34. Exactly. He gets his full inheritance in 8 months, unless Linda flipped to a page marked with colorful sticky notes, unless the trust board determines. He's made choices that are contrary to family values and long-term financial stability. I read the highlighted passage, my stomach sinking with each word. That's incredibly vague. Intentionally so. Look. At this amendment from 2018, Linda pulled out another document. Right after Jessica, Margaret convinced Robert to add more specific language about suitable marriage partners and appropriate family integration. She changed the trust rules to prevent Marcus from marrying Jessica. She changed them to prevent Marcus from marrying anyone she doesn't approve of, and look at the financial implications. Linda spread out a series of bank statements and investment summaries. The numbers were staggering millions of dollars in stocks, bonds, and real estate holdings. This is what Marcus stands to lose if he doesn't comply with his mother's wishes. How much exactly? Approximately $12 million in liquid assets, plus the family home in Connecticut, the apartment in Manhattan, and shares in Robert's investment firm. Linda traced her finger down a column of figures. But here's what's really insidious look at Marcus's current living situation. She pulled out another set of documents. His apartment rent, his car payments, his country club membership, even his grocery bills, everything is paid through trust accounts that Margaret controls. He doesn't have a personal checking account with more than $5,000 in it. He's 34 years old and he doesn't control his own money. He's never had to. Margaret has made sure of that. Linda opened her laptop and pulled up what looked like a spreadsheet. I had David help me trace Marcus's financial history. Every job he's ever had has been at companies where the family has connections. Every apartment he's lived in has been paid for by trust funds. Every major purchase has been pre-approved by Margaret. The picture Linda was painting was more disturbing than simple financial dependency. It was financial imprisonment. So when she tells him to choose between family and his relationships, she's not just asking him to choose between emotional loyalties. She's asking him to choose between comfortable dependency and financial devastation. Linda closed the laptop with a sharp click. Most people Marcus's age have been building credit, accumulating assets, developing financial independence for over a decade. Marcus has been kept in a state of artificial adolescence. I thought about our apartment, the one I'd assume we shared equally. Did I ever pay rent on anything that was actually ours? The apartment lease is in Marcus's name, but it's paid through a trust account. The utilities, the cable, even the grocery delivery service, all trust funded. Linda's expression was sympathetic but firm. I'm sorry, Kristin. I know this is hard to hear. It was hard to hear, but it also explained so much. Marcus's casual attitude toward money, his reluctance to discuss financial planning for our future, the way he deflected every conversation about joint accounts or shared financial goals. He literally didn't know how to be financially independent because he never had been. What about his job? Robert hired him straight out of college. His salary is decent, but not spectacular, about $70,000 a year. In New York, with his lifestyle, that wouldn't even cover his rent. So he's completely trapped. Completely. And Margaret knows it? Linda pulled out her phone and scrolled through what looked like a voice memo app. David recorded this conversation at last year's family Christmas party. Margaret thought she was speaking privately to Robert. She pressed play and Margaret's voice filled the room. Slightly muffled but clearly audible. Marcus needs to understand that his choices affect the whole family. If he insists on pursuing relationships with unsuitable women, he needs to accept the financial consequences. We've been too generous for too long. Robert's voice responded, weaker and less certain. Don't you think we should want him to be happy? Happiness is a luxury, Robert. Financial stability is a necessity. Marcus can be happy with someone appropriate, or he can be independent and struggling with someone inappropriate, but he can't have both. The recording stopped, and I sat in the silence that followed, trying to process what I'd just heard. She talks about people like their investments to be managed. That's exactly how she sees them. Marcus isn't her son, he's her project. And you weren't his fiancé, you were a threat to her project's success. Linda gathered the financial documents into a neat stack. But here's what Margaret doesn't realize: this level of financial control over an adult child, especially when it's used to manipulate personal relationships, creates legal vulnerabilities. Such as fiduciary duty violations, for starters. Trust administrators are legally required to act in the beneficiary's best interests, not their own interests or preferences. Using trust funds to control who Marcus can love violates that duty. And that's actionable? It's actionable. It's actionable. Especially when there's a pattern of discrimination. Linda pulled out another file. I've been researching similar cases, adult children challenging trust conditions that are discriminatory or controlling. The legal precedent is stronger than you might think. What would happen if we pursued this legally? Best case scenario? The trust conditions would be reformed. Marcus would gain financial independence, and Margaret would face consequences for her abuse of fiduciary duty. And worst case, the family fights back. It gets ugly and public, and Marcus chooses to side with Margaret because he's too scared to risk losing everything. I considered this. What do you think Marcus would do? Linda was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, I think Marcus is so psychologically dependent on his mother's approval that he'd choose financial security over personal growth, even if we handed him legal independence on a silver platter. So this isn't really about saving my relationship with him. No, this is about breaking a cycle of abuse that's been going on for years and will continue going on until someone stops it. Linda leaned forward. But I need you to be very sure. About this, Kristin. Once we start this process, there's no going back. Margaret will see you as a threat to everything she's built, and she'll respond accordingly. What does that mean? It means she'll try to destroy you the same way she's destroyed every other woman who's challenged her. She'd question your motives, your character, your professional competence. She'd make you doubt yourself and your memories. She'll turn people against you. I thought about Jessica and Elena, both of whom had been convinced to disappear quietly rather than fight back. I thought about the women who might come after me, facing the same systematic destruction of their confidence and self-worth. I'm not Jessica or Elena. I said finally, no, you're not. And I'm not going to disappear quietly. Linda smiled, the first genuinely warm smile I'd seen from her. Then let's give Margaret something she's never had to deal with before, which is consequences. She pulled out a fresh legal pad and uncapped her pen. Tell me everything you remember about your first meeting with Margaret. Every comment, every expression, every moment when you felt like you were being evaluated. We're going to build a case so solid that even Margaret's lawyers won't be able to deny the pattern. As I began to speak, recounting months of subtle slights and careful manipulations, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time since receiving Marcus's text, I wasn't just reacting to what had been done to me. I was taking control. Of what happened next, Margaret had made one crucial miscalculation. She'd assumed I would be like the others, that I would internalize her criticisms, accept her verdict, and disappear quietly into the night. She was about to learn just how wrong she'd been. Jessica Martinez agreed to meet me at a small cafe in Brooklyn, far enough from Manhattan that we wouldn't accidentally run into anyone from Marcus's world. She was smaller than I'd expected from her photos, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and eyes that seemed older than her 28 years. When she smiled, it didn't quite reach those eyes. Linda said you wanted to hear about my experience with the Hartwell family, she said after we'd ordered coffee. Her voice was soft but steady, like someone who'd spent a lot of time in therapy learning to speak about difficult things. If you're comfortable sharing it, I know this might be hard to talk about. It was hard. For a long time, it was very hard. Jessica wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, using it as an anchor. but I've done a lot of work on myself since then, and I hope that talking about it might help both of us. I nodded, waiting for her to find her starting point. I met Marcus at a charity fundraiser in 2019. I was representing the community center where I worked, and he was there with his family. He seemed different from the other guys. They're less pretentious, more interested in the actual cause than in being seen at the right event. How long before you met his family? About 6 weeks. He was so excited about it, kept talking about how much his mother was going to love me. Jessica's smile turned rueful. I should have paid attention to that phrasing, how much his mother was going to love me, not how much he wanted me to meet her. What was your first impression of Margaret? Polite. Almost aggressively polite. She asked all the right questions about my work, my background, my family. But there was something underneath it, like she was conducting an interview rather than having a conversation. I knew exactly what Jessica meant. Margaret had perfected the art of making personal questions feel like performance evaluations. When did you start to sense problems? Jessica was quiet for a moment, thinking. It was gradual. Little things that I told myself I was imagining, like how she'd introduce me to people. This is Jessica, Marcus's friend, even after we'd been dating for months. Or how she made plans for family events and somehow forget to include me until the last minute. When it was too awkward for Marcus to bring me along, the exclusion phase. Exactly. And Marcus would always have explanations. His mom was scattered. She was dealing with a lot. She wasn't used to him being in a serious relationship. Jessica shook her head. I wanted so badly to believe those explanations. What changed? Christmas 2019. Marcus and I had been together for almost 6 months, and I thought I'd be included in the family celebration. Instead, Margaret explained that Christmas Eve was just for immediate family, and maybe I could join them for dessert on Christmas Day. The parallel to my own situation was jarring. How did that feel? Devastating. But not because of the party itself, because of what it represented. I was good enough to date her son, but not good enough to celebrate with her family. Jessica's voice grew stronger as she continued. That's when I started paying attention to the pattern instead of making excuses for individual incidents. What pattern did you see? Every suggestion I made was politely dismissed. Every opinion I expressed was gently corrected. Every accomplishment I shared was met with concern about how stressful my work must be. Jessica leaned forward. She never said anything directly critical. She was too smart for that. But she made it clear that everything about me was somehow wrong. I felt a chill of recognition. Did Marcus see what was happening? Marcus saw what he wanted to see. When I tried to talk to him about his mother's behavior, he'd get defensive. He'd say I was being oversensitive, that I was looking for problems that weren't there. So you started doubting yourself. I started doubting everything. My perceptions, my reactions, my worth as a partner. Jessica's eyes grew distant. Margaret was subtle, but she was relentless. Every family dinner became a test I was failing. Every interaction became evidence that I didn't belong. How did it end? The ultimatum came in March 2020. Marcus said his family was concerned about our relationship, that they felt I was pulling him away from family commitments. He said, if I really loved him, I'd understand that family had to come first. And I said that if he really loved me, he'd stand up for me instead of asking me to disappear. Jessica's voice cracked slightly. But by then, Margaret had done such a thorough job of undermining my confidence that I half believed she was right. Maybe I was too demanding. Maybe I didn't understand their family dynamic. Maybe I really wasn't good enough for Marcus. So you left. I left. And I spent the next year in therapy trying to understand why I felt like such a failure when I hadn't actually done anything wrong. Jessica reached into her purse and pulled out a small jewelry box. Inside was an engagement ring not expensive, but clearly chosen with care and love. Marcus gave me this the week before the ultimatum, she said. I found it in my things when I was packing to move to Portland. I'd forgotten I still had it. The sight of the ring hit me like a physical blow. He proposed to you. He proposed to me. And then, a week later, his mother convinced him that our engagement was a mistake. Jessica closed the box with a snap. Linda told me about the trust fund conditions, about the financial control. I wish I'd known about that when it was happening. It would have helped me understand that Marcus's choice wasn't really about me. It was about money. Does that make it easier? In some ways. It makes it less personal. But in other ways, it makes it worse because it means he knew he was leading me on. He knew he'd never be able to choose me over his inheritance, but he let me believe otherwise. We sat in silence for a moment, both lost in our own thoughts about Marcus's capacity for self-deception and cowardice. Linda said you might be willing to testify about your experience, I said finally. I am, not because I want revenge, I'm past that, but because Margaret's behavior is abusive, and abuse thrives in secrecy. Jessica met my eyes directly. She destroyed my relationship and nearly destroyed my sense of self-worth. If there's a chance to prevent that from happening to other women, I want to take it. Even if it means revisiting painful memories. Especially if it means revisiting painful memories. That pain has a purpose now. Jessica smiled, and this time it did reach her eyes. Besides, Margaret made one crucial mistake with me. Which was? She assumed that because I'm quiet, I'm weak. And that, because I walked away without a fight, I wouldn't be willing to fight later when it mattered more. Jessica pulled out her phone and scrolled through her photos until she found what she was looking for, a screenshot of a text message thread. I saved everything, she said. Every text from Marcus asking me to be patient with his mother. Every email from Margaret suggesting ways I could better integrate with the family. Every voicemail from Marcus apologizing for his mother's behavior while asking me to excuse it. You documented everything. I documented everything. At first, because I thought it would help me understand what I was doing wrong. Later, because I realized I wasn't doing anything wrong, they were. She forwarded several files to my phone. Linda will know what to do with these. But Kristin, she reached across the table and touched my hand. Be prepared for this to get ugly. Margaret doesn't know how to lose gracefully, and she's never faced real consequences for her behavior. I'm prepared. Are you? Because she's going to come after everything, your character, your motives, your professional reputation. She's going to try to make you into the villain of this story. I thought about the past week about Marcus's weak explanations and Margaret's calculated cruelty. I thought about the pattern Linda had shown me, the systematic destruction of relationship after relationship. Let her try, I said. I'm not the same person I was a week ago. Jessica smiled, a real smile this time, full of warmth and recognition. No, you're not. And that's exactly what's going to make the difference. As we parted ways outside the cafe, Jessica handed me the jewelry box with Marcus's ring inside. I don't want this anymore, she said. But I think you should keep it. As a reminder of what this is really about, which is, it's not about getting Marcus back. It's about making sure Margaret never gets to do this to anyone else. I slipped the box into my purse, feeling its weight like a promise. Jessica was right. This wasn't about Marcus anymore. It was about justice. And for the first time in days, I felt ready to fight for it. Marcus showed up at my apartment Thursday evening, looking like he hadn't slept in days. I almost didn't let him in, seeing him standing in my doorway with those familiar green eyes, and that hopeful expression nearly broke my resolve. But then I remembered Jessica's ring in my purse and stepped aside to let him enter. The apartment feels different without your things, I said, closing the door behind him. He winced. Kristin, I know you're angry. I'm not angry anymore. And surprisingly, that was true. The rage had burned itself out over the past few days, leaving behind something cleaner and more dangerous clarity. Anger assumes I expected better from you. I don't anymore. Marcus sat heavily on the couch we'd picked out together 6 months ago. Everything in the apartment told the story of a relationship I thought was real, shared choices, compromised, decorating decisions, the gradual blending of two lives into one. Now it all looked like props in a play I'd been performing alone. I found something, he said, pulling a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. In my old desk at Mom's. House, I think you should see it. The paper was expensive stationery with his name embossed at the top, a graduation gift from his parents years ago. The handwriting was his, but it looked different somehow, more desperate than the careful script I knew. I can't do this anymore. The letter began. I can't keep letting you control every aspect of my life, including who I'm allowed to love. Kristin is the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I won't let you destroy that the way you destroyed Jessica and Elena. I'm resigning from Dad's firm, and I'm going to find my own place. If that means losing the trust fund, so be it. Some things are more important than money. I read it twice before looking up at him. You wrote this? 3 weeks ago. After you confronted me about the Christmas dinner. But you never sent it. I never sent it. His voice was barely a whisper. I got as far as Mom's office, had the letter in my hand, and I couldn't do it. Why? Marcus was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with self-awareness that seemed to surprise even him. Because I'm a coward. Because I've been living in a fantasy where I could have everything Mom's approval. The family money and you without ever having to choose. He looked up at me with eyes that were red-rimmed and exhausted. But that was never really an option, was it? No, it wasn't. I keep thinking about Jessica, he continued. About how I convinced myself that she was the problem, that she just didn't understand our family. But the truth is, she understood perfectly. She saw exactly what was happening, and I chose to let Mom's version of reality overwrite hers. I sat down across from him, studying his face. This was the most honest I'd ever seen Marcus, stripped of his usual confident charm, forced to confront the gap between who he thought he was and who he actually was. What changed? I asked. Linda called me yesterday. She told me about the legal action you're considering. My stomach dropped. Linda wasn't supposed to. She wasn't breaking confidence. She was giving me a chance to do the right thing before lawyers get involved. Marcus leaned forward, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. She told me about the trust fund investigation, about the pattern documentation, about Jessica's testimony. And I realized that everyone in my life has been protecting me from the truth except you. Mom protects me from consequences. Dad protects me from difficult decisions. Even Linda, until now, has been protecting me from seeing how bad my situation really is. He pulled out his phone and showed me a bank statement. The checking account balance was $847. This is everything I have that's actually mine, he said. Everything else, the apartment, the car, the job, the lifestyle, it's all dependent on Mom's approval. I'm 34 years old and I have less financial independence than most college students. Marcus, no, let me finish. Because I need to say this out loud and I may never have the courage again. He stood up and started pacing like movement might help him find the words. I've been living a lie. Not just about the money, but about everything. I told myself I was protecting you from Mom's criticism, but really I was protecting myself from having to choose. I told myself I was managing a difficult family situation, but really I was enabling Mom's abuse. The word abuse hung in the air between us. It was the first time I'd heard Marcus use that term to describe his mother's behavior. She is abusive, isn't she? He continued, the realization seeming to dawn on him as he spoke. All those years of controlling my relationships, my finances, my career, that's not normal family closeness. That's control, that's manipulation. Yes, it is. And I let her do it. Worse than that, I participated in it. Marcus stopped pacing and looked at me directly. I helped her destroy my relationship with Jessica. I was complicit in pushing Elena away, and I was about to do the same thing to you. About to? Until Linda's call made me realize that this time might be different. That this time, the woman I love might not just disappear quietly. His voice cracked. That this time there might actually be consequences. I felt a stab of something that might have been pity. Is that why you're here? Because you're afraid of the legal consequences? No, yes, both. He sat back down, looking defeated. I'm here because Linda made me realize that I've been destroying. my own life piece by piece, and letting Mom convince me it was everyone else's fault. So what do you want from me? I want to know if it's too late, if there's any way to undo the damage I've done. The question hung between us, loaded with possibility and pain. Part of me, the part that remembered falling in love with this man, the part that had planned a future with him, wanted to say it wasn't too late. But the larger part, the part that had spent the past week seeing our relationship clearly for the first time, knew better. Marcus, do you love me? Yes. God, yes, I love you so much. No, listen to the question I'm actually asking. Do you love me enough to choose me over your mother's approval? Do you love me enough to get your own apartment with your own money? Do you love me enough to build a life that's actually ours, not just an extension of your family's life? The silence that followed was answer enough. I want to, he said finally. I want to be that person. But you're not sure you can be. I'm not sure I know how to be. I've never had to support myself, never had to make decisions without family. Input, never had to. He stopped, hearing how his words sounded. I'm making excuses again, aren't I? You're making excuses. Marcus buried his face in his hands. What kind of man am I that I can't even fight for the woman I love? You're the kind of man your mother raised you to be. Dependent, compliant, and terrified of disappointing her. I leaned forward. But you're also 34 years old, which means you can choose to become someone different. How? By actually doing it. By moving out, getting your own place, supporting yourself. By going to therapy to figure out why you've let your mother control your life for so long. By proving through actions, not words, that you're capable of being the partner someone deserves. And if I do all that, if I actually change, would you consider giving us another chance? I looked at this man I loved, this man I planned to marry, and felt the last piece of my romantic illusions finally crumble. Marcus, even if you become everything you're promising to become, I'm not sure we could get past what's already happened. I'm not sure I could ever trust you to choose me when it matters. His face crumpled. So this is it? We're over. We've been over since you sent that text. Everything since then has just been figuring out how to end it. Marcus nodded slowly, tears finally spilling down his cheeks. I deserve that. I deserve to lose you. This isn't about what you deserve. It's about what I deserve. And I deserve someone who doesn't have to work up the courage to choose me. He stood up, the letter still clutched in his hand. For what it's worth, I am going to send this. I'm going to resign from Dad's firm, find my own place, figure out how to be financially independent. Good. You should do that regardless of what happens between us. And the legal action Linda mentioned? I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-interest. But all I saw was exhaustion and something that might have been relief. That's not about you, Marcus. That's about making sure your mother can't do this to anyone else. I understand. And for what it's worth, I hope you destroy her. The vehemence in his voice surprised me. You hope I what? I hope you make her face consequences for what she's done. To Jessica, to Elena, to you, to me. Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I'm not strong enough to stand up to her, but maybe you are. After Marcus left, I sat in my quiet apartment thinking about the letter he'd written but never sent, about the courage he almost had, about the life he might have lived if he'd been stronger. There was something tragic about loving someone who could see exactly what they needed to do but couldn't find the strength to do it. But there was also something liberating about finally accepting that Marcus's weakness wasn't my responsibility to fix. I couldn't love him into courage, couldn't support him into independence, couldn't believe in him hard enough to make him believe in himself for the first time since this all began. I felt truly free, not just from Marcus and his family, but from the illusion that love was enough to overcome fundamental incompatibilities of character. Some people rise to meet the challenges life presents. Others crumble under the weight of their own fears. I was done trying to hold up someone who refused to learn how to stand. The invitation arrived on Saturday morning, slipped under my apartment door like a secret message. Expensive cardstock, embossed lettering, Margaret's personal stationery. The Hartwell family cordially invites you to our annual Christmas celebration. December 23rd, 7 p.m. Cocktail attire requested. I stared at it for a full minute before calling Linda. She invited me, I said without preamble when Linda answered. To Christmas dinner? To the Christmas party. The big family gathering she's been planning all year. I read her the invitation. Details. This has to be some kind of trap. Oh, it's definitely a trap. The question is, what kind? Linda was quiet for a moment, thinking, did Marcus know about this? I don't see how he could have. He seemed genuinely surprised when I told him about the legal action. I set the invitation on my kitchen counter, studying it like it might reveal Margaret's intentions. What do you think she's planning? Margaret's not stupid. She knows we're building a case against her, and she knows that case depends on proving a pattern of exclusion and manipulation. Inviting you to the family party disrupts that narrative. So she's trying to make it look like she's been welcoming all along, or she's planning to create a scene where you look like the unstable one. Nothing would serve her better than having you show up and cause a confrontation in front of witnesses. I felt a chill. You think I shouldn't go? I think it's risky. But Linda paused. It might also be an opportunity. What kind of opportunity? The kind where Margaret finally reveals her true nature in front of people who matter. Her extended family, her social circle, people whose opinions she actually cares about. You want me to confront her publicly? I want you to give her enough rope to hang herself. Margaret's greatest strength is also her greatest weakness. She can't resist being in control. If you show up and don't react the way she expects, she might overplay her hand. I thought about this. What would that look like? You go to the party. You're polite, gracious, and completely unthreatened by her games. You let her make her moves, and you respond with dignity and strength. If she's planning to humiliate you, you make it backfire. And if she's not planning anything, if this really is just an olive branch, then we learn something important about how she operates under pressure. Either way, we win. Linda was right, but the idea of walking into Margaret's territory, surrounded by her allies and playing by her rules, terrified me. I'd spent the past week building confidence and clarity, but Margaret was a master manipulator operating on her own turf. I can't do this alone, I said. You won't be alone. David and I will be there. We're always invited to the family Christmas party. And I have a feeling this year's guest list might include some other interesting people, such as Jessica. I called her yesterday and explained the situation. She's flying in from Portland. Jessica's coming, and she's bringing Elena. My breath caught. Elena agreed to this? Elena's been waiting 3 years for a chance to confront Margaret. She was angry when she left, not broken. Like Jessica, she's been building a successful art career in Chicago, and she's ready to remind Margaret exactly who she tried to dismiss. The thought of Jessica and Elena standing with me gave me courage I didn't know I had. So it'll be the 3 of us against Margaret. It'll be the 3 of you standing together, forcing Margaret to confront the pattern of her behavior. She can dismiss one woman as unsuitable, maybe even 2. But 3 women, all successful in their own right, all with the same story. That becomes harder to explain away. Linda was right. Margaret's power came from isolation, from making each woman feel like her experience was unique, like her failures were personal. But if all 3 of us were in the same room, telling the same story, that narrative fell apart. What should I wear? Linda laughed. Whatever makes you feel powerful. This isn't about playing by Margaret's rules anymore. It's about showing her who you really are. After I hung up with Linda, I spent the rest of Saturday preparing, not just choosing an outfit or rehearsing what I might say, but mentally preparing for what could be the most challenging confrontation of my life. I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, eager to please, desperate for acceptance, willing to diminish herself to fit into someone else's vision of who she should be. That woman would have been destroyed by what Margaret had put me through, but I wasn't that woman anymore. The past week had burned away the parts of me that needed external validation, that measured my worth by other people's approval. What remained was harder, cleaner, more essentially myself than I'd been in years. I called my supervisor at the hospital and took a personal day for Monday. I had a feeling I'd need time to recover from whatever Sunday night brought. Then I did something I hadn't done since Marcus moved out. I cooked myself a proper dinner, opened a bottle of wine, and allowed myself to imagine what my life might look like on the other side of this confrontation. Whatever happened at Margaret's party, my relationship with Marcus was over. That much was clear. But maybe that wasn't the tragedy I thought it was. Maybe it was an opportunity to build something better, a life based on my own values, my own choices, my own definition of success. I raised my wine glass to the empty apartment. Here's to finding out who I am when nobody's trying to change me. The invitation sat on my counter, waiting. Tomorrow I would face Margaret on her own territory, surrounded by her allies, playing a game whose rules I was still learning. But for the first time since this all began, I wasn't afraid of losing. I was afraid of what I might be capable of winning. The Hartwell family home in Westchester was exactly what I'd expected, imposing without being ostentatious. Expensive without being flashy, the kind of old money elegance that whispered rather than shouted. I stood outside the front door for a full minute, listening to the sounds of conversation and laughter drifting from inside, steeling myself for what was about to happen. Linda had texted me an hour earlier. Jessica and Elena are already inside. Margaret doesn't know they're coming. Game time. I smoothed my black dress, simple, elegant, expensive enough to belong, but not so flashy as to look like I was trying too hard, and pressed the doorbell. Robert answered, his face cycling through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been relief. Kristin? I wasn't sure you'd come. Margaret invited me, I said simply, handing him my coat. I wouldn't want to disappoint her. The party was in full swing, maybe 40 people scattered throughout the main floor of the house. I recognized some faces from previous family gatherings, cousins, family friends, business associates. Everyone looked exactly like what central casting would order for a wealthy Connecticut Christmas party. Margaret appeared at my elbow within minutes, resplendent in cream silk and pearls, her smile as sharp as a blade. Kristin, darling, how lovely that you could make it. Her voice carried just far enough that nearby conversations paused. I wasn't sure you'd receive the invitation. I did. Thank you for including me. I kept my voice warm and steady, refusing to be drawn into whatever game she was starting. Of course. Family is so important during the holidays, don't you think? The emphasis on family was subtle but unmistakable. Though I suppose this must be difficult for you, given the circumstances. What circumstances would those be? Margaret's smile faltered for just a moment. She'd been expecting defensive or emotional responses, not calm questions. Well, naturally, the situation with Marcus and I are no longer together, if that's what you're referring to. But that doesn't change the fact that you invited me to your home. I'm grateful for the hospitality. Around us, I could sense people listening without appearing to listen, the particular skill of social animals who live for drama but pretend to be above it. Of course, Margaret recovered, and I do hope there are no hard feelings. These things happen, and it's so much better when everyone can be mature about it. Absolutely. Though I have to say, I've learned so much about family dynamics recently. It's fascinating how patterns repeat themselves. Margaret's eyes sharpened. Patterns? Oh, just family psychology. How certain behaviors get passed down through generations. How people develop strategies for maintaining control. I paused to sip my wine, letting this silence stretch. I've been reading some really interesting research about it. How nice. Margaret's tone suggested it was anything but nice. If you'll excuse me, I should check on the other guest. She glided away, but I could feel her attention on me like a spotlight. The first round had gone to me. I'd refused to be baited, refused to play the role of the bitter ex-girlfriend, and managed to make her uncomfortable instead. That was beautifully done. I turned to find a woman about my age with intelligent eyes and an amused smile. I'm sorry, do we know each other? We do now. I'm Jessica Martinez. My heart leaped. Jessica, I can't believe you're here. Linda thought it might be educational. For all of us. She gestured subtly toward the far side of the room, where a striking black woman in a deep purple dress was engaged in animated conversation. With David! Elena's been holding court over there for 20 minutes. I think she's enjoying herself. How long have you been here? About an hour. Long enough to watch Margaret's face when she realized who we were. Jessica's smile was sharp with satisfaction. I don't think she was expecting a reunion. What did she say? Nothing directly. But she's been circulating ever since, talking to people, probably trying to manage the narrative before it gets away from her. As if summoned by our conversation, Margaret appeared again, this time with Robert in tow and a slightly strained expression. Kristin, you remember Robert, of course, and I believe you know Jessica's such a surprise to see her here tonight. Jessica was Marcus's girlfriend before me, I said to Robert, as if Margaret hadn't spoken. We've been getting acquainted. It's amazing how much we have in common. Really? Robert looked genuinely interested. Such as, career paths, life, experiences, perspectives on family dynamics. I smiled at Jessica. It's like meeting a sister you never knew you had. Margaret's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. How lovely. Robert, didn't you want to introduce Kristin to the Washingtons? Actually, Elena's voice cut across the conversation as she joined our circle. I was hoping to meet Kristin myself. I'm Elena Rodriguez, another of Marcus's exes. This is turning into quite the reunion. The temperature around us seemed to drop 10 degrees. Margaret's smile was so forced it looked painful. Elena, what a surprise. Isn't it? Linda mentioned. The party, and I thought it would be fun to catch up with everyone. I've been telling David about my art show next month. He's thinking of commissioning a piece. Margaret looked like she'd swallowed something sour. 3 women, 3 successful women, 3 women she'd tried to erase, all standing together in her living room, refusing to disappear. How wonderful, Margaret managed, though I hope you're not dwelling on the past. It's so important to move forward. Oh, we are moving forward, Elena said smoothly. In fact, we've been having the most interesting conversations about patterns in relationships, haven't we, Jessica? Absolutely. It's remarkable how similar our experiences have been. I could see Margaret calculating, trying to figure out how to separate us or change the subject without causing a scene. Around us, more people were starting to pay attention to our conversation. Well, Margaret said finally, I suppose some people are just incompatible with our family dynamics. The words hung in the air like a challenge. This was at the moment Linda had predicted, when Margaret would overplay her hand. Incompatible how? I asked, my voice carrying just enough to be heard by the growing circle of listeners. Oh, you know. Different backgrounds, different values, different expectations about family relationships. Different how, specifically? Margaret's smile became even more strained. Well, naturally, our family has certain traditions, certain ways of doing things, and those traditions exclude people based on what criteria exactly. The question was direct enough that Margaret couldn't deflect it without looking evasive. Around us, conversations had stopped. People were watching openly now, sensing drama. It's not about exclusion, Margaret said, her voice rising slightly. It's about compatibility. It's about finding partners who understand our values. Which values would those be? Elena asked sweetly. Family loyalty, financial responsibility, social awareness. Interesting, Jessica said, because all 3 of us are financially independent, professionally successful, and very loyal to the people we love. So those can't be the values you're referring to. Margaret looked trapped. She glanced around at the watching faces, realizing that her audience wasn't entirely sympathetic. Of course, you're all lovely women, she said, her voice taking on a desperate edge. But sometimes people just aren't the right fit for a particular family. Not the right fit because... I pressed. Because Margaret stopped, seeming to realize she was walking into a trap. Because they don't understand our world. Our world meaning what? Wealthy, white Connecticut families? The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but they hit their target. Around us, there were a few sharp intakes of breath. Margaret's face went pale, then red. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Elena stepped forward. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like your family has a very specific type of woman they consider suitable, and the three of us didn't meet those specifications. You're being ridiculous, are we? Jessica's voice was calm but carrying. Because we've been comparing notes, and the pattern is pretty clear. 3 women, 3 similar experiences, 3 identical outcomes. Margaret looked around the room desperately, as if searching for allies, but the faces looking back at her were curious, judgmental, uncomfortable. I think, she said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger, that this conversation has gone quite far enough. I think, I said quietly, that it's just getting started. The silence that followed was electric. Margaret stood in the center of her own party, surrounded by her own guests, and for the first time in years, she wasn't in control of the narrative. Perhaps, Robert said suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension, we should all step into my study, privately. Margaret shot him a look that could have cut glass, but it was too late. The damage was done. Her guests had heard enough to understand that something serious was happening, something that went beyond ordinary relationship drama. As we moved toward Robert's study, I caught Linda's eye across the room. She gave me the smallest nod of approval. The first phase was complete. Margaret's careful facade was cracking, and everyone had seen it happen. Now came the hard part. Robert's study was all dark wood and leather chairs, the kind of room designed for serious conversations between serious people. Margaret closed the door behind us with more force than necessary, her composure finally cracking. What exactly do you think you're doing? She demanded, her voice shaking with rage. Having a conversation, I replied calmly. The same kind of conversation you've been having about us behind our backs for years. You have no right to come into my home and what? Tell the truth. Elena's voice was sharp. Point out the patterns, make it clear that your treatment of Marcus's girlfriends isn't accidental. Margaret turned to Robert, who was standing behind his desk looking deeply uncomfortable. Are you going to let them talk to me this way in our own home? Robert was quiet for a long moment, his hands clasped behind his back. When he finally spoke, his voice was tired. Margaret, maybe it's time we had an honest conversation about this. About what? About what you've been doing to Marcus's relationships. About the trust fund conditions. About the way you've been managing his personal life. Margaret's face went white. Robert, you can't possibly. I can, and I should have done it years ago. Robert moved to his desk and pulled out a thick folder. Linda showed me the documentation she's been collecting. The patterns, the financial manipulation, the systematic destruction of relationships. That woman has been filling your head with lies. These aren't lies, Margaret. These are facts. Dates, conversations, financial records. Robert's voice grew stronger. Did you really think I didn't notice what was happening? That I didn't see how Jessica disappeared, how Elena was pushed away, how Kristin was being isolated? I was protecting Marcus. From what? From love? From happiness? From building a life of his own? Margaret's composure cracked completely. From making mistakes. From choosing women who would drag him down, who would take advantage of him, who would never understand what this family represents. And what does this family represent, exactly? Jessica asked quietly. Margaret spun toward her, eyes blazing. Legacy, reputation, standards, things that matter more than temporary feelings or romantic impulses. Standards like what? Elena pressed. Be specific. Standards like. Margaret struggled, seeming to realize that any answer she gave would sound exactly as discriminatory as it was. Like being white, I suggested. Like coming from money? Like being dependent enough to be controlled. That's not, I never said. You didn't have to say it, Elena said. Your actions said it loud and clear. Robert opened the folder on his desk and pulled out several documents. Margaret, do you want to explain these trust fund amendments to me? The ones you convinced me to sign in 2018? Margaret's face went ashen. Those were necessary provisions. Necessary for what? For making sure Marcus could never marry anyone you didn't approve of. For making sure he didn't make impulsive decisions that would affect the whole family. Decisions, like marrying a social worker, Jessica asked, or an artist, or a nurse who saves children's lives. You don't understand the responsibilities that come with this kind of wealth, Margaret said desperately. The obligations, the expectations, whose expectations? Robert's voice was getting harder. Because I never expected Marcus to marry. Someone based on their bank account or their family connections. But the family business, the social obligations, the charitable boards can all be handled by competent, caring individuals regardless of their ethnic background or economic origins. Robert pulled out another document. Margaret, did you tell the Petersons that Kristin was temporary? Margaret flinched. I may have mentioned that Marcus was exploring his options. While he was engaged to her, the engagement was premature, according to whom? Robert's voice rose. According to you, because, as far as I know, Marcus is an adult who can make his own decisions about whom to marry. Not if those decisions threaten everything we've built. The words hung in the air like a confession. Margaret seemed to realize what she'd just admitted, but it was too late to take it back. There it is, Elena said softly. The truth finally comes out. What truth? Margaret demanded. That this was never about what's best for Marcus. It was about what's best for you. About maintaining your control, your vision of what the family should look like. That's not. It is, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. You've been treating Marcus like a possession to be managed rather than a person to be loved. And you've been treating his girlfriends like threats to be eliminated rather than individuals worthy of respect. Margaret looked around the room, seeming to realize that she had no allies left. Even Robert was staring at her with something approaching disgust. I have given Marcus everything, she said, her voice breaking. Education, opportunities, financial security, social connections. You've given him dependency, Jessica corrected. You've made sure he can't survive without your approval. And in return, Elena added, you've demanded the right to control every aspect of his personal life, including his choice of spouse. I finished. Margaret sank into one of the leather chairs, suddenly looking older than her 62 years. You don't understand. When I married Robert, I had nothing. No family money, no connections, no security. I've spent 30 years building this life. This position, this legacy for Marcus. And you're so afraid of losing it that you'll destroy his happiness to preserve it, Robert said quietly. I was protecting him. From what, Margaret? From love? From authentic relationships? From building something real with someone who actually cares about him as a person rather than a trust fund? Margaret looked up at Robert with tears in her eyes. From making the same mistakes I made. From marrying someone for the wrong reasons. From being vulnerable, from being human, Jessica asked gently. The question seemed to break something in Margaret. She started crying in earnest, not the elegant tears of someone trying to maintain dignity, but the messy, desperate sobs of someone whose carefully constructed world was falling apart. I've ruined everything, haven't I? She whispered. Not everything, Robert said carefully, but you've caused a lot of damage. To Marcus, to these women, to our family's reputation. What happens now? Margaret asked, looking around the room with something approaching fear. Now, Linda's voice came from the doorway. We talk about consequences. She entered the study carrying a briefcase, her expression professional and determined. I think it's time we discuss the legal implications of financial coercion and discriminatory trust fund administration. Margaret's face went white again. Linda, surely we can resolve this without public legal proceedings. Linda agreed. But that will require significant changes to how this family operates, starting with the trust fund conditions and extending to Marcus's financial independence. She set her briefcase on Robert's desk and opened it, revealing stacks of legal documents. I've prepared several options for moving forward. Which one we choose depends on how cooperative everyone is feeling. Margaret stared at the documents, like they were a death sentence. What kind of changes? Complete reform of the trust conditions. Immediate financial independence for Marcus. Public apologies to Jessica, Elena, and Kristin. And ongoing monitoring to ensure this pattern never repeats itself. Margaret's hand shook as she reached for the documents. And if I refuse, then we proceed with formal legal action. Discrimination lawsuits, fiduciary duty violations, financial coercion charges. Linda's voice was matter-of-fact, like she was reading a grocery list. Plus, of course, the media attention that would come with such high-profile cases. Media attention? 3 successful women systematically excluded from a wealthy family based on racial and economic discrimination, using trust funds as weapons of control. Margaret, that's front-page material for every major newspaper in the tri-state area. Margaret buried her face in her hands. My reputation, the charitable boards, would all be very interested in your methods of family management. Yes. Linda pulled out a chair and sat down. But it doesn't have to come to that. We can resolve this privately, with dignity and tact, if you're willing to make real changes. Robert moved around his desk to sit beside Margaret. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked like he was taking charge of his own household. Margaret, this has to stop. Whatever your reasons, whatever your fears, this behavior ends now. But Marcus needs guidance. Marcus needs freedom. He needs to make his own mistakes and his own successes. He needs to be an adult. Margaret looked up at him with devastated eyes. If we give him financial independence, he might choose someone completely inappropriate, then that's his choice to make. Robert's voice was firm. And inappropriate according to whom? According to you? Because, frankly, Margaret, your judgment about Marcus's relationships has been questionable at best. Elena spoke up from her corner. Mrs. Hartwell, can I ask? You something? Margaret nodded weakly. What would Marcus have to do to earn your approval for a marriage partner? What would the woman have to be like? Margaret was quiet for a long moment. I suppose I want someone who understands the responsibilities that come with our position. Someone who can handle the social obligations, the charitable commitments, the performance of being rich, Jessica interjected. It's not performance. It's a way of life. A way of life that excludes people based on their background rather than their character, I said. Margaret flinched. That's not, I never intended. But that's what happened, Elena said gently. Whether you intended it or not, you created a system where only certain types of women were acceptable, and that system was discriminatory. I was trying to protect the family by controlling it, Robert said. And control isn't protection, Margaret. Control is fear. The room fell silent except for Margaret's quiet crying. I found myself feeling something unexpected, not quite sympathy, but recognition. Margaret was terrified of losing the security she'd fought so hard to build, and that terror had made her cruel. Mrs. Hartwell, I said finally, I don't think you're a bad person. I think you're a scared person who's been making bad choices. Margaret looked up at me with surprise. But being scared doesn't excuse the damage you've caused. And it doesn't give you the right to control other people's lives. What do you want from me? Margaret asked, her voice barely a whisper. I looked at Jessica and Elena, then at Linda and Robert. I want you to acknowledge what you did. I want you to understand that your behavior was wrong, and I want you to make sure it never happens again. And Marcus? Marcus has to make his own choices about his life. Without your interference. Margaret nodded slowly, seeming to age another 10 years in the space of a moment. What happens to us, to our family? That depends on what you do next, Linda said, gesturing to the documents. You can choose to be part of the solution, or you can choose to be part of the problem. But you can't choose to continue things the way they've been. Margaret reached for the papers with trembling hands. If I sign these, if I agree to the changes, do I lose my son? Robert moved his chair closer to hers. Margaret, you never owned Marcus. He's not something you can lose because he was never yours to possess. But if he becomes independent, then maybe, for the first time, you'll have a chance to build a real relationship with him, one based on love instead of control. Margaret stared at the documents for a long time. Finally, she looked up at me. I owe you an apology. Yes, you do. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for treating you badly, for excluding you, for making you feel unwelcome. You didn't deserve that. She turned too. Jessica and Elena. And I'm sorry to both of you as well. I was wrong and I caused you pain, and I'm truly sorry. The apologies felt genuine, but they also felt like just the beginning of a much longer process. Apologies are a start, Linda said, but they need to be followed by actions. Real changes, permanent changes. Margaret picked up the first document and began to read. How long do I have to decide? 24 hours, Linda replied. After that, we file formal complaints. Margaret nodded and continued reading. The rest of us sat in silence, watching her confront the legal consequences of years of manipulation and control. Finally, she looked up. If I sign these, what guarantee do I have that you won't pursue legal action anyway? None, Linda said bluntly. You'll have to trust that we're more interested in justice than revenge. Just like Jessica, Elena, and Kristin had to trust Marcus. Until you taught them not to. The parallel hung in the air. Margaret was being asked to do what she'd never allowed Marcus to do, take a leap of faith. Trust in other people's good intentions, make herself vulnerable. It was, I realized, exactly what she deserved. The party was still going on when we emerged from Robert's study, though the atmosphere had shifted. Conversations were quieter, more speculative. Word had clearly spread that something significant happened behind closed doors. Margaret had excused herself immediately, claiming a headache, but not before promising Linda she'd have an answer by tomorrow evening. Robert remained behind, sitting heavily in his chair like a man who just realized the weight of years of willful blindness. She signed, he said quietly. Margaret's many things, but she's not stupid. She knows this is her only chance to salvage both her reputation and her relationship with Marcus. What about you? I asked. How long have you known what was happening? Robert was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with regret. Longer than I should have. I told myself I was keeping the peace, avoiding conflict, but really I was just taking the path of least resistance. He looked up at me with tired eyes. I failed Marcus. I failed you and Jessica and Elena. I failed to be the kind of man who stands up for what's right when it matters. But you stood up tonight, Jessica said gently. Too late, and only when I had no choice left. Robert shook his head. I've been a coward, and it's cost my family dearly. We left him there, surrounded by his leather-bound books and expensive furniture, contemplating the cost of his passivity. In the hallway, Linda pulled me aside. How are you feeling? Honestly, exhausted, but also, I searched for the right word. Vindicated. For the first time since this started, I feel like my experience was real, like my perceptions were accurate. They were. All of them. Linda squeezed my shoulder. You should be proud of what you did tonight. It took tremendous courage. As we rejoined the party, I noticed Marcus standing near the kitchen, talking quietly with David. He looked up when he saw me, his expression unreadable. Could we talk? He asked. Privately? We stepped onto the back terrace, where the December air was sharp and clean. Marcus looked different, somehow younger and older at the same time, like someone who'd just woken up from a long dream. I heard what happened in Dad's study, he said. How much did you hear? Enough. David filled me in on the rest. Marcus leaned against the terrace railing, staring out at the garden. I can't believe I let this go on for so long. Can't you? He looked at me sharply. That's fair. I suppose I can believe it. That's the problem. Marcus, no, let me say this. I need to say this. He turned to face me fully. I've been thinking about what you said the other night, about how love is a choice. You were right. Every day, every moment, we choose who we prioritize. And I've been choosing wrong for years. It's not just about choosing me over your mother. No, it's about choosing courage over comfort. It's about choosing growth over stagnation. It's about choosing to be the kind of person who deserves love instead of just expecting it. The words were right, but something in his tone made me wary. What are you saying? I'm saying I want to change. I want to be better. I want to be the man you thought you were marrying. Marcus, I know it's too late for us. I understand that. But maybe it's not too late for me to become someone worthy of someone like you. There was something heartbreaking about the way he said it, like he was already practicing for the next woman, the next chance at love that he might not sabotage. What does that look like practically? I asked. I'm moving out of the family apartment. I found a place in Brooklyn Small, but it's mine. I'm paying for it with my salary. And the job? I'm keeping it for now, but Dad and I had a conversation about changing the reporting structure. I'll be working under one of the senior partners instead of him directly. More accountability, less family favoritism. That's a good start. It's a start. I'm also going to therapy, not couples therapy, individual therapy, to figure out why I've been so afraid of disappointing people that I ended up disappointing everyone. I nodded, feeling something that might have been hope for him, if not for us. There's something else, Marcus continued. About the trust fund. What about it? I'm rejecting it. Even if Mom reforms the conditions, even if the lawyers make it fair and equitable, I don't want it. I stared at him. Marcus, that's millions of dollars. It's millions of dollars that have been used to control me my entire adult life. It's a cage made of gold, and I'm done living in it. What will you do? What everyone else does. Work, save, build a life based on what I earn rather than what I inherit. He smiled ruefully. It's terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. Your mother will be devastated. My mother will have to learn to love me without controlling me. And if she can't, Marcus shrugged, then at least I'll know where I stand. We stood in silence for a moment, both of us processing what this meant. Marcus was choosing the hardest possible path: financial independence at 34, emotional independence from a family that had never required it of him, starting over in ways most people don't have to at his age. I'm proud of you, I said finally. Are you? I'm proud that you're finally making these choices. I'm sorry it took losing our relationship to get you here, but I'm proud of you for getting here at all. Marcus nodded, accepting the mixed blessing of my approval. Do you think someday maybe we could be friends? I considered this. Maybe after you've proven to yourself that you can be the person you're promising to become. After enough time has passed that we can interact without all this history weighing on us. How long do you think that will take? I don't know. Years, probably. He accepted this too, with a grace I hadn't seen from him before. Will you keep in touch? Let me know how you're doing. Through Linda, maybe? I think direct contact would be too complicated for a while. I understand. We went back inside where the party was winding down. Jessica and Elena were by the front door, saying their goodbyes to David and some of the other guests. I noticed several people looking at us with curiosity tonight had definitely provided enough gossip to fuel conversations for months. Ready to go? Jessica asked when she saw me. More than ready. As we were leaving, Robert appeared at my elbow. Kristin, could I speak with you for a moment? Jessica and Elena continued toward the car while Robert and I stepped aside. I wanted to thank you, he said, for forcing us to confront what was happening in our family. It couldn't have been easy. It wasn't. And I wanted you to know what Margaret did. The way she treated you, it doesn't represent our family's values. It represents her fears, but not our values. I appreciate that. I also wanted to ask, is there anything I can do? Any way I can help repair the damage that's been done? I thought about this. Support Marcus in his independence. Don't let Margaret sabotage his progress. And maybe think about getting some counseling yourself to figure out why you enabled this behavior for so long. Robert nodded slowly. That's fair. That's very fair. As we drove back to the city, the three of us sat in comfortable silence, each processing the evening in our own way. Finally, Elena spoke. So what now? Now we wait to see if Margaret signs the agreements, Jessica said. And we see if Marcus follows through on his promises. And if they don't, then Linda files the lawsuits, and we prove that there are consequences for treating people like disposable objects. I leaned back in my seat, feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from getting what you want, but the kind that comes from standing up for what's right. You know what's funny? I said, I thought this was about saving my relationship with Marcus. But it was never about that. What was it about? Elena asked. It was about finding out who I am when someone tries to convince me I'm not enough. It was about discovering that I'm actually much stronger than I thought. Jessica smiled in the rearview mirror. Welcome to the club. What club? The club of women who survived Margaret Hartwell and came out better for it. We laughed and the sound filled the car with something that felt remarkably like victory. Margaret called Linda at exactly 6 p.m. the next evening. I was at Linda's office, helping organize the final documentation for the potential lawsuit when the phone rang. She wants to meet, Linda said after hanging up. Tonight. At her house. She says she's ready to sign the agreements. All of them? That's what she claims. But she wants to do it in person with witnesses present. She specifically requested that you be there. I felt a stab of anxiety. Why me? Probably because you're the one who started this avalanche. She wants to look you in the eye when she surrenders. Or she wants one last chance to manipulate the situation. Possibly. Are you willing to go? I thought about it. Part of me wanted to be done with Margaret forever, to let Linda handle the legal mechanics and move on with my life. But another part of me, the part that had been systematically undermined and dismissed, wanted to witness her acknowledgement of wrongdoing. I'll go. But I want Jessica and Elena there too. I think that can be arranged. 2 hours later, we were back in the Hartwell family home, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. The house felt smaller somehow, less imposing. Margaret met us at the door herself, no staff, no Robert, just her in a simple black dress with her. Hair pulled back severely. Thank you for coming, she said, her voice carefully controlled. I know this isn't easy for any of us. We gathered in the living room where Margaret had arranged the legal documents on the coffee table like a formal presentation. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by defeat and resignation. Before I sign these, she began, I want to explain something. Not to excuse my behavior, but to help you understand why I became the person who did these things. Linda started to object, but Margaret held up a hand. Please, I need to say this. She sat down across from us, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I grew up poor, not just working class poor. My father left when I was 8, and my mother worked 3 jobs to keep us housed and fed. I wore secondhand clothes and got free lunch at school and learned very early that the world judges you based on things that have nothing to do with your character. Margaret's voice was steady but strained, like someone giving testimony under oath. When I met Marcus's biological father, in college he represented everything I'd never had: security, respect, belonging. When he died, I was terrified of losing that security. Marrying Robert wasn't just about love, it was about survival. We understand that your background was difficult, Jessica said gently. But that doesn't justify— No, it doesn't. Nothing justifies what I did to you, to any of you. Margaret's voice cracked slightly. But I want you to understand that when I looked at Marcus's relationships, I didn't see love stories. I saw threats to everything I built, everything I'd sacrificed for. So you decided to eliminate the threats, Elena said. I decided to protect what was mine. And in doing so, I became exactly the kind of person I used to hate: someone who uses power to hurt people who can't fight back. Margaret reached for the first document and signed it without reading it again. Her signature was shaky but decisive. This agreement reforms the trust fund conditions, she said, handing it to Linda. No more restrictions based on marriage partners or family approval. Marcus gets his full inheritance at 35 regardless of his personal choices. She signed the second document. This one establishes Marcus's immediate financial independence. All current expenses paid through trust accounts will be transferred to his personal control within 30 days. The third signature was harder for her. I could see her hand trembling as she wrote her name. And this is my formal acknowledgement of discriminatory behavior and my agreement to make public apologies where appropriate. When she was finished, Margaret sat back in her chair, looking like someone who'd just signed away everything that mattered. To her, "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we see if Marcus follows through on his promises," Linda said. "And we see if you can learn to have a relationship with your son that isn't based on control. And if I can't, then you'll have learned an expensive lesson about the cost of loving people conditionally." Margaret nodded, accepting this harsh truth. "What about you?" she asked, looking directly at me. "Will you ever be able to forgive me?" The question hung in the air between us. I studied Margaret's face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculated emotion, but all I saw was genuine regret and fear. "I don't know," I said finally. "Forgiveness isn't something you earn by signing documents. It's something that happens over time if you prove through your actions that you've really changed. And if I do prove it, then maybe someday we can have a conversation where you're not trying to manage me and I'm not trying to defend myself." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I lost him, didn't I?" "I tried so hard to keep him safe that I lost him completely." "You didn't lose him?" Robert's voice came from the doorway. He'd been standing there listening, though none of us had noticed. "But you did nearly destroy him. And yourself." Margaret looked up at her husband with desperate hope. "Robert, I've signed everything. I've agreed to all the changes." Can we? "We can try to rebuild," Robert said carefully. "But Margaret, this isn't just about legal agreements. This is about fundamental changes in how you see other people, how you treat them, how you relate to our son." I know, and I want to change. I want to be better." "Then prove it, not with words or signatures, but with daily choices. Starting tomorrow." Margaret nodded eagerly, like a student accepting assignment instructions. "What should I do first?" "Get therapy," I said, surprising myself by speaking up. "Real therapy, with someone who specializes in control issues and family dynamics. Figure out why you became someone who could systematically destroy other people's happiness." "I will." "I'll call someone tomorrow." "And make those public apologies you agreed to," Elena added. "Not just to us, but to your social circle. Let people know that your treatment of Marcus's girlfriends was wrong. That will damage my reputation." "Your reputation deserves to be damaged," Jessica said bluntly. "You used your social position to harm people. There should be consequences for that." Margaret flinched, but nodded. "You're right. I'll do it. And give Marcus space," Linda added. "Don't try to manage his transition to independence. Don't offer advice he doesn't ask for. Don't try to maintain control by being helpful. But what if he makes mistakes?" "Then he makes mistakes," Robert said firmly. "That's what adults do. They make mistakes and learn from them without their mothers orchestrating their lives." As we prepared to leave, Margaret walked us to the door. "Kristin," she said quietly, "I want you to know Marcus really did love you. This wasn't about his feelings for you. This is about my inability to accept that his feelings mattered more than my fears." "I know," I said. "But knowing that doesn't change what happened." "No, it doesn't." Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Outside, Linda handed me copies of all the signed agreements. "How do you feel?" "Tired, relieved, sad." I looked back at the house where Margaret and Robert were probably having their own difficult conversation. I feel like I witnessed the end of something that had been dying for a long time. Margaret's version of family, Margaret's version of love. Love as control, love as possession, love as fear. I folded the documents carefully. Maybe now Marcus has a chance to learn what real love looks like. "And what about you?" Jessica asked as we got in the car. "What does real love look like for you now?" I thought about it as we drove back to the city. I think it looks like someone who chooses me not because I fit into their life perfectly, but because they want to build a life that fits us both. Someone who doesn't need me to be smaller or different or more convenient. Someone who fights for you instead of asking you to fight for your place in their world, Elena added. Exactly. As we drove through the city lights, I felt something shift inside me, not just the relief of resolution, but the excitement of possibility. For the first time in months, my future felt open and unscripted, full of potential rather than limitations. Margaret had taught me something valuable, though not in the way she'd intended. She'd shown me exactly what I wouldn't accept in my life, what I wouldn't tolerate from people who claimed to love me. It was perhaps the most useful gift anyone had ever given me. 3 weeks later, Linda called me at work with news that was both expected and shocking. "Margaret's followed through on everything," she said. "The trust fund has been reformed. Marcus has his own bank account with actual money in it, and she's made public statements to her social circle about her behavior." Public statements? She resigned from 2 charity boards, claiming she needed to reassess her approach to family relationships. She also made a very carefully worded announcement at the hospital fundraising committee meeting about the importance of welcoming diversity in family structures. I was quiet for a moment, processing this. "How do you know all this?" David was at the hospital meeting. Apparently, it was quite the shock to everyone who knows Margaret. Several people asked him if she was having some kind of breakdown. And what did he tell them? That she was having some kind of breakthrough. The distinction felt important. A breakdown would have been temporary, something to recover from. A breakthrough suggested permanent change. What about Marcus? Marcus moved into his Brooklyn apartment last weekend. He's furnished it entirely with his own money secondhand furniture, discount store dishes, the works. David says he's never seen him happier. Really? Really? Apparently, there's something deeply satisfying about earning your own furniture. I could understand that. After years of having everything provided, making choices based on what you could afford rather than what was available must feel revolutionary. Has he asked about me? He asks David how you're doing, but he hasn't tried to contact you directly. He seems to be respecting your request for space. That surprised me. The Marcus I'd known would have been sending flowers, leaving voicemails, showing up at my apartment with grand gestures and emotional pleas. Who is this person, and what did he do with my ex-fiancé? Linda laughed. His therapist seems to be doing good work. Apparently, they're focusing on something called differentiation learning to maintain relationships without losing yourself in them. That would be useful for him. It would be useful for most people, honestly. I was quiet for a moment, thinking about the strange turns my life had taken. Linda, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think Margaret really changed? Or do you think she's just scared of the legal consequences? Linda was quiet for a long moment. I think she's both. Fear can be a powerful motivator for change, especially when someone has never faced real consequences before. Whether that fear-based change becomes genuine transformation, that remains to be seen. How will we know? Time, consistency, whether. She maintains these changes when no one's watching, when the pressure's off, when she thinks she's safe again. And if she doesn't, then we'll know that the legal agreements weren't enough, and we'll pursue more aggressive action. The conversation reminded me that this whole experience wasn't really over, it was just entering a new phase. Margaret's signatures on documents were the beginning of accountability, not the end. There's something else, Linda continued. Something that might interest you? What? Ellen has decided to stay in New York for a while. She's been offered a gallery show in Soho, and she wants to be here to manage it personally. That's wonderful. I'd love to see her work. She's also been talking to other women who've had similar experiences with controlling families. She's thinking about starting some kind of support group or resource network. The idea gave me chills in the best way. Really? Really? She says what happened to the 3 of you can't be unique there. Have to be other women dealing with financial manipulation and family control. She wants to help them find resources and legal support. That's incredible. It is. And she's asked if you'd be interested in helping. I thought about this as I finished my shift at the hospital. The idea of turning our painful experience into something that could help other women was both appealing and daunting. It would mean talking about what happened, reliving some of the worst parts, making ourselves public in ways that felt risky, But it would also mean that Margaret's attempt to silence and dismiss us had backfired completely. Instead of disappearing quietly, we'd become advocates for other women in similar situations. That evening, Elena called me directly. "Linda told you about the support group idea?" She did. "I think it's brilliant." "I'm glad you think so, because I've already had 3 women contact me through friends of friends. Apparently, our story's been making the rounds in certain social circles. Our story? The 3 ex-girlfriends who took down the Hartwell family matriarch. We're becoming something of a legend. I wasn't sure how I felt about being legendary. What are these women dealing with? Similar patterns. Financial control, family manipulation, systematic exclusion. One woman's been engaged for 2 years, but her fiancé's mother keeps finding reasons to postpone the wedding. Another had her boyfriend's family run credit checks on her without her knowledge. That's horrible. It's more common than you'd think. Wealthy families have all kinds of ways to control their adult children's relationships, and you want to help them fight back? I want to help them recognize what's happening to them. A lot of these women think it's their fault, that they're not good enough or they're doing something wrong. They need to hear from people who've been through it and came out the other side. The parallel to my own experience was exact. For months, I blamed myself for not fitting in with Marcus's family, for not being able to win Margaret's approval. It wasn't until Linda showed me the pattern that I understood the game was rigged from the beginning. What would this look like? Practically, monthly meetings maybe. A safe space for women to share their experiences and get practical advice. Legal resources, emotional support, strategic planning for confronting family manipulation. Like a combination support group and tactical planning session? Exactly. Linda's already agreed to provide legal consultation on a volunteer basis. We just need someone with counseling skills to help facilitate the emotional processing. I might know someone, I said, thinking of Dr. Martinez, the hospital social worker who'd helped me process my own experiences over the past month. She specializes in family trauma and boundary setting. Perfect. Are you in? I thought about it for a moment, about the time commitment, the emotional energy, the risk of making my private pain public. Then I thought about Margaret's letter to Marcus, about Jessica's broken engagement, about Elena's years of self-doubt. I'm in. Good, because I've already booked us a conference room at the community center for next Thursday. I laughed. You were that confident I'd say yes? I was that confident you'd do the right thing. There's a difference. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment thinking about the strange trajectory my life had taken. 6 weeks ago, I'd been planning a wedding and trying to win approval from a family that was never going to accept me. Now I was planning to help other women recognize and escape similar traps. It wasn't the future I'd imagined, but it was a future I could be proud of. A future built on strength rather than compromise, on clarity rather than wishful thinking, on helping others rather than just surviving myself. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Elena told me about the support group. Count me in. It's time to put our experience to good use. I smiled and texted back. The Margaret Hartwell Recovery Society? Too specific. How about women who refuse to disappear? Perfect. And it was perfect in the way that the best things in life often are born from pain but growing into purpose, taking the worst thing that had happened to us and transforming it into the best thing we could do for others. Margaret had tried to erase us, but we'd become indelible instead. There was something deeply satisfying about that kind of poetic justice. The lease on my new apartment was signed on a Tuesday morning in February, 3 months after what Elena had started calling the Christmas confrontation. The place was smaller than the apartment I'd shared with Marcus, but it was entirely mine chosen. By me, furnished by me, paid for with money I'd earned saving children's lives. I stood in the empty living room with my keys in my hand, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years, complete ownership of my own space. No compromised furniture, no inherited decorations, no careful navigation of someone else's family's expectations. Just me and my choices and the freedom to make mistakes that were entirely my own. The first meeting of women who refused to disappear had been held the week before, and it had been both more successful and more heartbreaking than I'd expected. 12 women had showed up, some with stories similar to ours, others dealing with different but equally destructive family dynamics. There was Sarah, whose mother-in-law had convinced her son that Sarah's student loan debt made her financially irresponsible, despite Sarah being a successful physical therapist. There was Maria, whose boyfriend's family had been joking about her accent and suggesting English classes for 2 years. There was Jennifer, whose fiance's mother had actually hired a private investigator to research her family background. Each story was different in its details, but identical in its underlying pattern: women being systematically undermined, excluded, and gaslit by families who saw them as threats to be managed rather than people to be welcomed. The crazy thing, Jennifer had said during our discussion, is that I started believing them. I started thinking maybe I wasn't good enough, maybe I was asking for too much. Maybe I should just accept being treated like a second-class citizen. That's exactly what they want, Elena had responded. They want you to internalize their judgment so they don't have to keep enforcing it. Dr. Martinez, the social worker I brought in to facilitate, had nodded approvingly. Psychological manipulation works by convincing victims that the abuse is their fault. Once you accept that narrative, you start policing yourself. The conversation had continued for 2 hours, women sharing strategies, resources, and most importantly, validation that their experiences were real and their reactions were justified. Now, standing in my empty apartment, I thought about how far I'd come from the woman who'd received Marcus's text that night in December. That woman had been devastated by rejection, desperate for approval, willing to believe that love required self-diminishment. This woman was different. This woman had learned to trust her own perceptions, to value her own judgment, to require reciprocal respect in relationships. This woman had discovered that being alone was infinitely preferable to being with someone who couldn't defend her when it mattered. My phone rang, interrupting my philosophical moment. Linda's name appeared on the screen. "How is the new place?" she asked when I answered. "Empty, but promising." "How are things with the Hartwell situation?" "Surprisingly stable." Margaret's maintained all the changes she agreed to still in therapy, still giving Marcus space, still keeping her opinions about his life choices to herself. And Marcus? Flourishing, according to David. He's been promoted at work, a real promotion based on merit, not family connections. He's dating someone new. I felt a small stab of something that might have been jealousy, followed immediately by genuine happiness for him. Anyone I know? A teacher he met through his volunteer work. Apparently, she has no idea who his family is or how much money they have. Good for him. Good for both of them. And Kristin Marcus asked David to tell you something. What? He said to tell you thank you. For forcing him to grow up. For not accepting the relationship he was capable of then, so he could learn to be worthy of the relationship he wants now. The message hit me harder than I'd expected. There was something beautiful about the idea that our painful ending had been necessary for his beginning, that my refusal to accept less than I deserved had taught him what he needed to offer. That's actually really lovely. I thought you'd appreciate it. He also said that when enough time has passed, when you're both in completely different places, he hopes you can be friends, but not until then. He's learning about boundaries. He's learning about a lot of things. Turns out being financially independent and emotionally responsible is good for his character development. After Linda hung up, I continued unpacking boxes, thinking about the strange ways that losing one future can open up possibilities for another. If Marcus and I had stayed together, if I never discovered Margaret's manipulations, if I'd accepted being perpetually excluded and diminished, I would never have learned what I was actually capable of, would never have confronted a powerful woman in her own territory and won. I would never have helped create a support network for other women facing similar battles. I would never have discovered that I was strong enough to start over completely, to build a life based entirely on my own values and choices. My doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Elena stood in the hallway with a bottle of champagne and a huge smile. "Congratulations on your independence," she said, handing me the bottle. "I brought celebration supplies." "Just champagne?" and Thai food, and Jessica, who's parking the car. We spent the evening sitting on my floor, eating pad thai out of containers and toasting my new beginning. The conversation ranged from practical matters, furniture recommendations, neighborhood restaurants, to deeper questions about what we'd learned from our experiences. "Do you think you'll ever get married?" Jessica asked during a lull in conversation. "Someday, maybe, but only to someone who sees marriage as adding to my life rather than replacing it. Someone who fights for you instead of asking you to fight for your place," Elena added, echoing our earlier conversation. "Someone who thinks I'm perfect exactly as I am, not someone who thinks I'll be perfect once they help me improve," I finished. "Those are pretty high standards," Jessica observed. "They should be high standards. We all deserve partners who are excited about who we are, not disappointed by who we're not." Elena raised her plastic cup of champagne. "To high standards and the courage to maintain them. To refusing to disappear," Jessica added. "To discovering that we're much stronger than anyone ever told us we were," I concluded. We clinked our cups. Together, 3 women who'd been dismissed and undermined and systematically erased, now celebrating our refusal to accept that treatment. It felt like the most authentic toast I'd ever participated in. Later, after Elena and Jessica had gone home, I sat in my quiet apartment thinking about the future I was building. It looked nothing like the future I'd planned 6 months ago, but it felt infinitely more like me. I wasn't the woman who would accept exclusion for the sake of keeping peace. I wasn't the woman who would diminish herself to fit someone else's vision of who she should be. I wasn't the woman who would disappear quietly when things got difficult. Was the woman who stood up in Margaret's living room and demanded answers. I was the woman who helped other women recognize their own strength. I was the woman who chose herself when no one else would dot. It had taken losing everything. I thought I wanted to discover everything I actually needed. The trade-off, I realized, had been worth it. 6 months after the Christmas confrontation, I received an unexpected invitation. Not expensive stationery this time, but a simple email from Marcus with the subject line, "A request, not an expectation." "Kristin," it read, "I know we agreed to maintain distance while we both worked on becoming better people. I've been respecting that boundary, and I hope you felt free to heal and grow without interference from me. I'm writing now because I've reached a milestone in my journey that I wanted to share with you, not because I expect anything from you, but because it feels important to acknowledge how much your courage changed my life. This weekend, I'm celebrating 1 year of financial independence and 6 months of living authentically as the person I choose to be rather than the person my family expected me to be. I'm having a small gathering at my apartment, nothing fancy, just friends and people who've supported my growth. I would be honored if you felt comfortable attending, but I completely understand if you prefer not to. There's no pressure, no hidden agenda, no hope for reconciliation. Just gratitude for the woman who refused to accept less than she deserved, and in doing so taught me what I needed to become. If you do decide to come, know that several people, they're including my girlfriend, Anna, know our history and understand the role you played in my personal development. You wouldn't be walking into an awkward situation or having to explain yourself, whatever you decide. I want you to know that the work I've done this year was inspired by your example. You showed me what courage looks like, what boundaries look like, what self-respect looks like. I'm a better man because of lessons you taught me, often without meaning to. Thank you for refusing to disappear. Thank you for fighting back. Thank you for being stronger than all of us thought, with respect and gratitude. Marcus." I read the email 3 times before showing it to Elena, who was helping me paint my bedroom that Saturday afternoon. Well, she said after reading it on my phone, "That's certainly not what I expected from Marcus Hartwell." What did you expect? Dramatic gestures, love letters, attempts to win you back through grand romantic proclamations. Elena handed me back the phone. "This is much more mature." "It is, isn't it? Are you going to go?" I thought about it while we finished painting the accent wall. The idea of seeing Marcus again was both appealing and terrifying. I was curious about the person he'd become, proud of the growth he'd achieved, but also protective of my own peace and progress. "I think I am," I said finally. Not because I want to rekindle anything, but because I want to see if he's really changed as much as he seems to have. And if he has, then I'll be happy for him. And if he hasn't, I'll leave early and never look back. Elena nodded approvingly. That sounds like a plan from someone who knows her own boundaries. The party was the following Saturday evening. I spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing what to wear, not because I wanted to impress Marcus, but because I wanted to feel confident and comfortable in whatever situation I might encounter. Settled on a blue dress that I bought for myself after getting a promotion at work, professional, but not severe, attractive but not attention-seeking, entirely chosen for my own satisfaction rather than anyone else's approval. Marcus's apartment in Brooklyn was exactly what Linda had described, small but comfortable, furnished with pieces that were clearly chosen for function rather than status. The contrast to this family's Connecticut mansion was striking, and I thought, probably intentional. He answered the door himself, and I was startled by how different he looked. Not physically, he was still the same tall, dark-haired man I'd known, but something fundamental had changed in his posture, his expression, his presence. He looked settled in a way I'd never seen before, comfortable in his own skin rather than performing a role. "Kristin," he said, his smile genuine and warm but not desperate. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I would either," I admitted, but curiosity won. "I'm glad it did. Come in, let me introduce you to some people." The party was small, maybe 15 people in the living room and kitchen, all of them seeming genuinely happy to be there, rather than attending out of social obligation. I recognized David and Linda in one corner, deep in conversation with a woman I didn't know. "That's Anna," Marcus said, following my gaze. "My girlfriend. She's a second-grade teacher, which means she has infinite patience for people who are still learning basic life skills." There was something self-deprecating but not self-pitying in the way he said it, like someone who'd learned to laugh at his own journey without minimizing its importance. "She's lovely," I said and meant it. Anna was petite and animated, gesturing enthusiastically as she talked to Linda about something that was clearly fascinating to both of them. "She is. And more importantly, she likes me for who I am now, not who I might become with proper management." The comment was pointed but not bitter, acknowledging our history without dwelling in it. "How did you meet?" "At a literacy program I volunteer with. She was teaching kids to read, I was helping with basic math skills." We started talking about education policy and discovered we had similar values about helping underserved communities. "That's wonderful. It is." She has no idea about the trust fund drama, doesn't know about my family's money, doesn't care about any of that. She fell in love with the guy who shows up every Saturday to help kids with homework. I found myself genuinely happy for him. This was the Marcus I glimpsed occasionally during our relationship, the one who'd been buried under layers of family, expectations, and financial dependency. Does she know about me? She knows I was engaged to someone who helped me realize I needed to change my life. She knows I'm grateful to that person, but that we're not in contact anymore. She's secure enough not to need more details than that. Good for her. We were interrupted by Linda, who approached with Anna in tow. "Kristin." Linda's hug was warm and genuine. "I'm so glad you decided to come." "Me too. And you must be Anna?" Anna's handshake was firm, her smile direct and friendly. "I've heard so much about you. Marcus says you're one of the strongest people he's ever known." "That's very kind of him to say." "It's not kindness," Marcus interjected. "It's accuracy." As the evening progressed, I found myself relaxing in ways I hadn't expected. The conversation was easy, the atmosphere warm, and Marcus was consistently the person his email had suggested, grateful, grounded, and focused on his present rather than obsessing over his past. When Anna excused herself to get more wine, Marcus and I found ourselves alone on a small balcony, looking out over the Brooklyn skyline. "I owe you an apology," he said suddenly. "Marcus, you've already, not for the relationship stuff." "I mean, yes, for that too, but that's not what I'm talking about." He turned to face me directly. "I owe you an apology for wasting 3 years of your life on someone who wasn't worthy of you." The words hit me harder than I'd expected. You weren't. I was. I was unworthy of you then, and I knew it, and I let you love someone who couldn't love you back the way you deserved. His voice was steady but emotional. You gave me everything you had, and I gave you whatever was left over after I'd satisfied everyone else. Marcus, let me finish, please. He took a breath. I've been in therapy for 8 months now, and one of the things I've learned is that I was emotionally unavailable, not because I didn't care about you, but because I was so terrified of disappointing my mother that I couldn't risk fully committing to anyone else. I know that now. But you shouldn't have had to figure that out through 3 years of gradually escalating rejection and exclusion. You shouldn't have had to fight for basic respect from my family. You shouldn't have had to choose between your dignity and our relationship. I was quiet for a moment, processing his words. This was the conversation I needed 3 years ago, the acknowledgement I craved but never received. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for being strong enough to leave when I wasn't strong enough to choose you. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both of us processing the weight of what we'd just acknowledged. Are you happy? I asked finally. I am. Really, genuinely happy for the first time in my adult life. Marcus smiled, and it was the most authentic expression I'd ever seen from him. Are you? I am. I'm building a life that's entirely mine, helping other women find their own strength, dating people who think I'm perfect exactly as I am. People? Nothing serious yet. But I'm meeting men who see me as an addition to their lives rather than a project to be managed. I smiled. It's refreshing. I'm glad. You deserve someone who celebrates you instead of trying to change you. As the evening wound down, Marcus walked me to the door. Thank you for coming tonight. It meant more than you know. Thank you for inviting me. And Marcus, I'm proud of you. For doing the work, for changing, for becoming the person you wanted to be. I couldn't have done it without your example. Yes, you could have. You just needed to want it badly enough. He nodded, accepting the truth of that. Will you keep in touch? As friends, I mean, nothing more than that. I considered this. Marcus, standing in front of me, was different from the man I'd been engaged to, more solid, more present, more capable of authentic relationship. The danger of falling back into old patterns felt minimal. I'd like that, I said. Friends. I walked to the subway. I felt something I hadn't expected. Closure. Not the dramatic, tear-filled closure of movies, but the quiet satisfaction of seeing someone you once loved become the person they were always capable of being. Marcus, and I would never be together again, but that was okay. He'd become worthy of Anna, and I'd become worthy of whatever amazing person was waiting to discover me. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone is the refusal to accept less than they're capable of offering, even if that means they have to offer it to someone else. I was happy for him. And more importantly, I was happy for me. 1 year later, I was standing in the same community center where women who refused to disappear held our monthly meetings. But this time the room was decorated with balloons and a banner that read, "Celebrating 1 year of refusing to disappear." 37 women filled the space, some original members, others who joined as word spread about our group. The diversity was striking. Teachers and lawyers, artists and engineers, women in their 20s and women in their 50s, representing every background imaginable, but united by the common experience of having their worth questioned by the families of people they loved. When we started this group, Elena was saying from the front of the room, we thought we were just 3 angry women who needed to vent about bad experiences. We had no idea we were starting a movement. Applause filled the room, and I felt the same surge of pride I experienced every month when we gathered. What had begun as our personal rebellion against Margaret's manipulation had evolved into something much larger, a resource for women facing family coercion, a support network for those rebuilding their lives, and most importantly, a reminder that we didn't have to accept mistreatment just because it came wrapped in the language of love. I want to share some numbers with you, Dr. Martinez said, taking Elena's place at the front. In the past year, women from this group have filed 12 legal actions against families using financial coercion, helped 23 women escape manipulative relationships, provided testimony in 6 court cases involving trust fund discrimination, and created a resource guide that's now being used by women's organizations in 14 states. More applause, but I was thinking about the less quantifiable victories, the confidence rebuilt, the self-doubt overcome, the voices that have learned to speak up instead of disappearing quietly. But the most important statistic, Dr. Martinez continued, is this one. 100% of the women who've participated in this group report feeling stronger, more confident, and better able to maintain healthy boundaries in their relationships. Jessica leaned over to whisper in my ear, "Remember when you thought your life was over because Marcus chose Christmas dinner over you?" I laughed quietly. That feels like a different lifetime. It was a different lifetime. You were a different person. She was right. The woman who'd received that devastating text message would barely recognize the person I'd become. That woman had been desperate for approval, willing to diminish herself for acceptance, convinced that love required sacrifice of self. This woman knew better. This woman had learned that the right person would never ask her to be smaller, quieter, more convenient. This woman had discovered that being alone was infinitely preferable to being with someone who couldn't defend her when it mattered. "There's someone special here tonight," Alina announced, interrupting my thoughts. "Someone who traveled from Portland specifically for our anniversary celebration." I looked around the room, confused, until I saw her Margaret, standing near the back wall. Looking smaller and older than I remembered, but unmistakably present, the room went quiet as people noticed her, whispers spreading as those who knew our story recognized the woman who'd started it all. Mrs. Hartwell asked if she could say something to the group, Alina continued. "I told her it was up to you, Kristin, since this all began with her treatment of you." Every eye in the room turned to me. I could feel the weight of expectation, the curiosity about how I'd handle this unexpected confrontation. Part of me wanted to say no, to protect our safe space from the person who embodied everything we were fighting against, but another part of me was curious about what Margaret wanted to say. What had brought her across the country to face a room full of women whose experiences mirrored my own? "She can speak," I said finally. For 5 minutes, Margaret made her way to the front of the room, moving carefully like someone who was no longer sure of her welcome anywhere. When she reached the microphone, she looked directly at me. "Thank you," she said simply, "for giving me this opportunity." She turned to address the room. "My name is Margaret Hartwell, and I am the reason this organization exists." The honesty was startling, and the room remained silent. A year ago, I was a woman who had built her entire identity around control. I controlled my family's finances, their social connections, their relationships, and most harmfully, their personal choices about love and marriage. Margaret's voice was steady but strained. I told myself I was protecting my son from making mistakes. What I was actually doing was preventing him from living his own life. She paused, looking around the room at the faces watching her. I systematically destroyed my son's relationships with 3 remarkable women because they threatened my vision of what his life should look like. I used financial pressure, emotional manipulation, and social exclusion to force him to choose between love and security. Margaret's eyes found mine again. And when one of those women refused to disappear quietly, when she stood up in my living room and demanded accountability, I realized that I had become exactly the kind of person I used to despise, someone who uses power to hurt people who can't fight back. The room remained completely silent. I'm here tonight because Kristin Wilson saved my family. Not by accepting my treatment of her, but by refusing to accept it. Not by disappearing quietly, but by fighting back so effectively that I was forced to confront what I had become. Margaret took a shaky breath. I've spent the past year in intensive therapy, learning to understand why I became someone who could systematically destroy other people's happiness. I've learned about control and fear and the ways that trauma can turn victims into perpetrators. What I want to say to all of you is this: what happened to you was not your fault. The manipulation, the exclusion, the systematic undermining of your confidence, none of that was because you weren't good enough. It was because the people who should have protected you were too scared, too controlling, or too invested in their own vision of how your lives should look. Margaret's voice grew stronger. And I want to thank you for refusing to disappear, for creating this space, for supporting each other, for proving that there are consequences when families use love as a weapon of control. She stepped back from the microphone, then added quietly, I know I can't undo the damage I caused, but I hope that by acknowledging it publicly, by taking responsibility for my actions, I can contribute in some small way to ensuring it doesn't happen to others. The applause that followed was uncertain, scattered, but it was applause. Margaret had done something I'd never expected. She'd taken full responsibility for her actions without excuses or justifications. After the formal program ended, I found Margaret by the refreshment table, standing alone while conversations buzzed around. That was brave, I said, approaching her carefully. It was necessary, she replied, and long overdue. How are you doing? Really? Margaret considered the question seriously. I'm learning to be a different person. It's harder than I expected, but also more rewarding. I'm building a relationship with Marcus based on respect rather than dependence, and I'm discovering that I actually like the person he's chosen to become. And Anna's perfect for him. She challenges him, supports him, and sees him as he really is rather than as I wanted him to be. Margaret smiled ruefully. It turns out my judgment about suitable partners was spectacularly wrong. What about Robert? Robert and I are in couples therapy, learning to have a marriage based on partnership rather than power dynamics. It's difficult, but worthwhile. I nodded, impressed despite myself by the scope of changes Margaret had made. Kristin, she said suddenly, I want you to know that watching you stand up to me changed something fundamental in how I see the world. You showed me what strength looks like, what dignity looks like, what refusing to be diminished looks like. Thank you for saying that. I'm not saying it to make myself feel better. I'm saying it because it's true and because I think you should know the impact you've had. As the evening wound down, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought us all to this point. A year ago, I'd been devastated by rejection. Convinced that losing Marcus meant losing my chance at happiness, now I understood that losing Marcus had been the beginning of finding myself. His rejection had forced me to discover my own strength, to build my own support system, to create my own definition of success and happiness. Jessica appeared at my elbow with 2 cups of coffee. So what's next for Kristin Wilson, woman who refuses to disappear? I accepted the coffee gratefully. I'm thinking about going back to school, getting my master's in social work, maybe specializing in family systems therapy, following in Dr. Martinez's footsteps, something like that. This group has shown me how much I enjoy helping people navigate family dysfunction and rebuild their confidence. That's perfect. You'd be amazing at it. Elena joined us, carrying her own coffee and looking satisfied with the evening's success. Margaret asked me to give you this, she said, handing me an envelope. Inside was a check made out to women who refused to disappear for $10,000, along with a note, for the work you're doing to help other women find their strength. With gratitude and respect, Margaret Hartwell. She's funding our continued existence, I said, showing Jessica and Elena the check. There's poetic justice in that, Elena observed. The woman who tried to silence us is now supporting our mission, to help others find their voices. As we locked up the community center and headed home, I thought about the card I'd received that morning, a simple congratulations note that had made me smile. It was from Marcus, now living happily with Anna in a relationship built on mutual respect and authentic connection. 1 year of freedom, he'd written. Thank you for showing me what it looks like to refuse to settle for less than you deserve. Watching you build your new life has been inspiring. Here's to both of us becoming the people we were always meant to be. It was signed simply, your friend, Marcus, and that felt exactly right. We'd moved from lovers to strangers to something better, 2 people who'd helped each other grow, who could celebrate each other's happiness without wanting to possess it. My phone buzzed with a text from someone. I'd been dating for a few months a fellow nurse named David who thought my work with the support group was admirable rather than threatening, who encouraged my ambitions rather than trying to manage them. How did the anniversary celebration go? He'd written. I'm proud of you for everything you've built." I smiled and texted back. It was perfect. "See you tomorrow?" "Can't wait," came his immediate reply. As I walked home through the New York evening, I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete alignment between who I was and how I was living my life. No performance, no compromise, no careful navigation of other people's expectations. Just me, living authentically, surrounded by people who celebrated rather than tried to change me, building something meaningful from the ashes of what I'd once thought was my only chance at happiness. Margaret's text message had been meant to exclude me, to make me disappear, to convince me I wasn't worthy of love and acceptance. Instead, it had been the catalyst for discovering exactly how strong, how valuable, and how unwilling to disappear I really was. The woman who received that message had thought her life was ending. The woman walking home tonight knew it had been just the beginning.